We like to imagine that the past is carved in stone, fixed, permanent, waiting patiently beneath our feet for us to uncover it. There is a certain comfort in believing that fossils tell us the truth, that ancient bones act as loyal witnesses, and that history simply needs to be dug up to be understood. But the reality is far more complicated. Fossils do not shout the truth, they whisper fragments of it. And in our hunger for certainty, we often mistake those whispers for a complete story. When the first humans began picking up strange bones from the earth, they didn't understand what they found. They saw monsters, mythical beasts, and divine creatures. Fossils became storytellers long before scientists ever studied them. Even today, with all our knowledge and technology, that old habit has not faded entirely. We still project meaning onto the stones we uncover. We still hear what we want to hear. Imagine holding a fossilized tooth in your hand. It is cold, lifeless, and stripped of every detail that once made the creature alive. Yet in that tiny tooth, we build entire worlds, ecosystems, behaviors, relationships, even emotions. A single jawbone can become a scene, a hunt, a migration, a family. But this act of interpretation, as beautiful as it is also dangerous. Because fossils rarely volunteer the full truth. They give us clues, not conclusions. Human beings love stories. More importantly, we love complete stories, ones with beginnings, middles, and ends. So when science presents us with fragments, our minds instinctively try to fill in the gaps. We smooth the edges, create connections, and craft narratives that feel clean and satisfying. But the prehistoric world was not clean or simple. It was chaotic, layered, and often contradictory. Every fossil carries the weight of this chaos, yet we often simplify it into neat diagrams and timelines. Take, for example, the idea of primitive and advanced creatures, terms we use without realizing how misleading they are. A fossil may look unfamiliar or strange, but that doesn't make it primitive. A creature may appear similar to modern animals, but that doesn't make it advanced. Evolution does not move in straight lines, nor does it care about our need for progress. And yet, when we find a fossil with certain features, we immediately place it on a ladder, lower, higher, less evolved, more evolved. The stone says nothing about such hierarchies, we impose them. There is also the illusion of completeness. A fossil skeleton displayed in a museum looks impressive, confident, and authoritative. But visitors rarely realize that many of these skeletons are only partially real. Missing bones are filled in with plaster. Unknown shapes are sculpted based on guesses or comparisons to related species. Even the posture of the fossil, how it stands, how it walks, how it holds its head, is often speculative. Museums are not lying, they are creating visual interpretations. But these interpretations easily become truth in the mind of the public. And this brings us to one of the most subtle forms of deception, confidence. Fossils, by their nature, appear ancient, solid, and dependable. They look like evidence that cannot be argued with. But the certainty we associate with them does not come from the fossils themselves, it comes from the stories we build around them. Scientists, like all humans, can become attached to their interpretations. Entire careers have been built on a single fossil. Entire theories have collapsed because a bone was misidentified. The stone remains silent through all of this. We are the ones speaking for it. Consider how many conditions must align perfectly for a fossil to exist at all. A creature must die in the right place, at the right time, under the right circumstances. Its body must escape scavengers, decay, erosion, crushing, and chemical destruction. It must survive millions of years of geological violence. The rock layer must remain accessible to future eyes. A human must happen to dig in the correct spot. The fossil must be noticed, recognized, preserved, catalogued, and studied. This long chain of impossibilities shows us something profound. Fossils are not a representative sample of the past, they are statistical miracles. Because of this, the fossil record is not just incomplete, it is deeply biased. Entire species, entire ecosystems, entire eras may have flourished and vanished without leaving a single fossil behind. What we know is shaped not by what existed, but by what survived. And what survived is shaped not by history, but by chance. Yet we treat fossils as if they were deliberate messages from the past. There is a seduction in this. A fossil offers a physical connection to a creature that lived millions of years ago, a moment of awe and intimacy. Holding it, you almost feel as if you are touching time itself. This emotional experience can cloud judgment. Even scientists, trained to be objective, are not free from the enchantment of discovery. When you find a bone half buried in ancient soil, your heart races. Your mind leaps ahead, imagining what this creature looked like, how it lived, what secrets it carries. In that moment of wonder, it becomes easy to forget that the fossil is only a fragment, not a full biography. And yet, despite their limitations, fossils remain one of the most powerful tools we have for understanding our origins. They anchor us. They remind us that life is ancient, fragile, and ever-changing. The issue is not the fossils themselves but the confidence we place in them. If we approach them with humility, if we treat them as questions rather than answers, they become sources of insight rather than illusions. The seduction of stone is not a deception. It is a mirror. Fossils reflect our desire to know who we are, where we came from, and what came before us. They reflect our fear of uncertainty. They reflect our need for storytelling. And as long as we remember this, remember that fossils whisper rather than shout, we can listen to them with greater clarity. Because the truth is not that fossils lie. It is that we often ask them to tell stories they were never meant to tell. If Earth truly kept a diary, it would be a book thicker than mountains, yet most of its pages are missing. What survives is scattered, torn, water-damaged, and incomplete. Fossils are the tiny scraps left behind, fragile fragments of what was once an unimaginably vast record of life. And even those fragments come to us by accident, not intention. When we look at the fossil record, we are not reading a story from beginning to end, we are staring at isolated sentences from different chapters, written in a language we are still learning to translate. The first thing we must understand is that nature does not preserve life equally. Preservation is selective, sometimes brutally so. For every creature that left behind a fossil, billions lived and died without leaving a single trace. Whole species may have risen, thrived, struggled, and vanished with no physical evidence that they ever existed. This isn't because they were unimportant but because the conditions required for fossilization are extremely rare. The Earth is constantly rewriting itself, rivers shift, mountains rise, oceans consume coastlines, and the crust folds in on itself. In this dynamic world, memories are always being erased. Picture a dense, humid rainforest from millions of years ago. Life is everywhere, calling, crawling, growing, dying. But environments like this almost never preserve fossils. The soil is acidic, the moisture accelerates decay, and the constant activity of insects and microbes ensures that nothing remains for long. The world that seems the most alive leaves behind the least evidence. Meanwhile, a dry desert floodplain, barren and harsh, may preserve bodies in an instant when disaster strikes. Our understanding of the past is biased toward the environments that favored preservation, not the environments that were most common or most important. This bias creates illusions. It can make certain periods seem like explosions of life simply because conditions were good for fossilization. It can make other periods appear empty, quiet, or uneventful when in reality they may have been bursting with evolutionary change. We often mistake absence of fossils for absence of life, but the two are not the same. The silence in the fossil record is not the silence of nature, it is the silence of lost pages. Even within preserved environments, chance rules everything. A creature has only a tiny window in which fossilization can occur. If it dies on exposed ground, scavengers disperse its bones. If it dies in water but is not buried quickly, decay destroys it. If mud covers it but the sediments later erode, the fossil disappears before anyone can find it. The probability of survival is so low that when we do find fossils, they represent a statistical miracle, a survivor of a survivor. And yet, because humans naturally trust physical evidence, we tend to treat the fossil record as if it were a fair sample of the past. We draw charts, timelines, and lineages using the fossils we have, forgetting how much we do not. Imagine reconstructing a 1,000-page novel after finding only a handful of pages. A few characters are described, a few scenes appear, but the relationships between them remain unclear. That is the challenge paleontologists face every day. When scientists attempt to interpret the past, they must navigate this ocean of missing information. Gaps stretch across millions of years. Entire transitional species are inferred but never seen. Evolutionary relationships are pieced together like mosaics missing most of their tiles. It is a testament to human ingenuity that we have shaped so much understanding from so little evidence, but it is also a reminder of how fragile that understanding is. Geological processes add another layer of complexity. Over time, rock layers can tilt, fold, or break. Fossils can be moved, crushed, or rearranged. Stratigraphy, the study of rock layers, is like reading a diary that someone has taken apart, scrambled, and reassembled out of order. Sometimes, fossils appear in places where they should not be, not because the species was there, but because the land moved. A flood might carry bones far from where the creature lived. Erosion might expose only selective fossils while hiding others. Each discovery must be interpreted not just as a biological event but as a geological puzzle. Even dating methods, though powerful, rely on assumptions about how rocks formed and changed over time. We are confident in many of these methods, but no technique is perfect. When we assign ages to fossils, we are making educated estimates built on complex layers of reasoning. This approach is rigorous, but it is also vulnerable to unexpected revelations. A single discovery, a skull in the wrong layer, a tool in unexpected sediment, can force scientists to revise entire timelines. And yet, despite this uncertainty, we continue to search. Because every fossil, even the smallest and most fragmented, has the potential to illuminate an entire forgotten world. A single tooth can suggest diet, climate, predators, and evolutionary connections. A partial footprint can reveal locomotion, behavior, or even social patterns. With enough fragments, a picture begins to form, not perfect, but powerful. Still, we must remind ourselves that no matter how detailed the picture becomes, it is never complete. The missing pages of Earth's diary will always outnumber the surviving ones. And this is not a flaw, it is a natural consequence of deep time. The planet was never obligated to preserve its history for us. It moves forward, indifferent to memory, erasing and rewriting itself again and again. What we hold in museums, in labs, and in our hands are not the full story but glimpses, precious fragments rescued from oblivion. They allow us to peer into the past but not to see it clearly. And perhaps that is the humbling beauty of paleontology, it teaches us to search not for certainty, but for understanding within uncertainty. The missing pages remind us that knowledge is always provisional, always expanding, always shifting. They remind us that the past is not a single narrative but a vast, tangled web of lives and stories, most of which remain hidden beneath layers of silence. And in this silence, there is a kind of quiet awe, a reminder of how small we are in the grand chronology of Earth. The fossil record is not Earth's diary. It is the handful of pages the universe allowed us to keep. Imagine stepping into a prehistoric forest where humidity hangs in the air like a living presence. Every inch of the landscape is overflowing with life, towering ferns, insects with wings shimmering like stained glass, mammals darting through undergrowth, and distant calls of creatures that no longer exist. Yet for all its vibrancy, this world is destined to vanish without a trace. The soil is acidic, rainfall constant, and every fallen leaf or bone dissolves into the earth before it can be preserved. This was a world full of stories, but almost none of them survived. The fossil record is oddly silent about environments like this, not because they were rare, but because they were too alive, too dynamic, and too warm for memory to take hold. Throughout Earth's history, entire ecosystems existed that left almost nothing behind. Rainforests, marshlands, mountain valleys, tropical islands, all bursting with biodiversity, were among the least likely to preserve fossils. Conditions that favored life often worked against preservation. Heat accelerated decay. Rich soil fed fungi and bacteria that consumed remains quickly. Scavengers ensured that bones rarely stayed intact. In such places, creatures lived and died without the faintest geological footprint. The result is a strange irony: the richer the environment, the poorer the fossil record. This absence creates huge blind spots in our understanding of ancient life. We know the desert settings of the past far better than the lush forests. We know droughts more clearly than monsoons. We know death events more vividly than stable, thriving ecosystems. Paleontology, by its nature, gravitates toward places where disaster struck: flash floods, volcanic ash falls, sudden burial events. These catastrophic moments preserved life in ways everyday environments never could. But this means our mental picture of the past is skewed toward rare tragedies, not daily realities. Consider the ancient mammals that lived alongside early hominins in Africa. Many of them inhabited wet, wooded areas with high biological activity, conditions nearly impossible for fossil preservation. Their bones decayed long before they had a chance to fossilize, leaving scientists with only hints based on scattered teeth or the occasional fragment. The same is true for many primate species. A vast number of our distant relatives likely lived in environments that erased them completely. In many ways, our evolutionary tree is shaped as much by geological chance as by biological history. This loss is not just scientific, it carries emotional weight. When we think of prehistory, we imagine vast landscapes teeming with life, yet the record that reaches us is often sparse and quiet. It is as if we are listening to an orchestra that once filled the world with music but now only a few fading notes remain. Entire symphonies of ancient ecosystems have disappeared, and we are left trying to reconstruct them from echoes. Volcanic regions tell a different story. When a sudden eruption blankets a landscape in ash, preservation becomes possible in ways everyday life never allows. Bodies are encased, footprints locked in place, and delicate structures preserved in astonishing detail. These rare, dramatic records give us extraordinary insight, but they also create a misleading impression of consistency. They capture a single day, a single moment, not the full scope of how creatures lived. They are snapshots, not documentaries. And yet, because they are all we have, they often shape our perceptions of entire species or ecosystems. Then there are the environments that actively destroy evidence. Rivers that constantly churn their sediments. Coastal zones where waves grind shells and bones into powder. Mountain ranges where erosion exposes fossils only to obliterate them moments later. Even ice, which we often imagine as a perfect preserver, can crush and distort remains over time. Earth is a restless planet. It does not hold still for us. Its landscapes move, reshape, and erase themselves constantly. In this constant cycle of creation and destruction, only a small fraction of life is lucky enough to be fossilized. And even then, that fossil must survive millions of years of earthquakes, climate shifts, erosion, chemical weathering, and tectonic upheaval. It must then be found by someone in the right place at the right time, a needle in a haystack buried beneath countless layers of earth. The fact that we have any fossils at all is incredible, the fact that we have so few is inevitable. This perspective reframes our relationship with deep time. We often imagine ancient worlds as fixed scenes we can reconstruct perfectly. But the reality is that Earth was constantly transforming itself. Forests became deserts. Lakes dried up into plains. Entire continents shifted positions. Life adapted, migrated, thrived, and vanished across landscapes that rarely left geological signatures. The world that refused to be remembered was not empty, it was simply too alive, too changing, too delicate for stone to capture. This realization teaches humility. Our view of ancient life is built on incomplete evidence, shaped more by geological luck than scientific certainty. Every fossil discovery is not just a data point, it is a reminder of the worlds we cannot see, the creatures we will never know, and the histories lost to time. When we marvel at a beautifully preserved fossil, we are also marveling at the thousands, perhaps millions, of other lives that vanished without a trace. And yet, this absence does not diminish the richness of the past. In some ways, it enhances it. The silence of the fossil record invites imagination. It urges us to fill the gaps, not with false certainty, but with wonder. It reminds us that life has always been larger and more complex than the stories we carve from stone. The world that refused to be remembered is still with us, in a sense. It survives in the DNA of modern species, in the echo of ancient evolutionary paths, and in the landscapes shaped by long-forgotten ecosystems. Though its fossils may be lost, its influence endures. In the end, the past is not defined by what it left behind, but by what it lived through. And some worlds, no matter how vibrant, simply chose not, or were unable, to leave their memories in stone. In the earliest days of paleontology, long before advanced dating methods and digital reconstruction, the science of studying ancient life was equal parts curiosity, imagination, and bold experimentation. The people who first attempted to interpret fossils were pioneers, stepping into a world no human had ever seen and trying to make sense of it with limited tools and incomplete evidence. Their mistakes were inevitable, but they were also magnificent. They reveal not only how far we've come but how deeply human our urge to understand the past has always been. Imagine a time when a massive bone discovered in a farmer's field was assumed to belong to giants mentioned in ancient myths. Before the concept of extinction was widely accepted, many believed that strange bones belonged to creatures still living somewhere in unexplored lands. This worldview created space for wild interpretations. A single vertebra might be thought to belong to a dragon. A fossilized tooth could become evidence for a monstrous sea serpent. The early fossil hunters were not foolish, they were exploring unknown territory, using the only references they had, folklore, scripture, and imagination. As paleontology slowly became a scientific discipline, scholars began assembling skeletons from the fragments they found. But the process was far from straightforward. Often, bones were scattered, broken, or missing entirely. Many skeletons displayed in early museums were artistic reconstructions rather than accurate anatomical models. Without comparative anatomy and evolutionary knowledge, early scientists made understandable but dramatic errors. One famous example is the reconstruction of the iguanodon. The first discoveries included a large spike, which paleontologists confidently placed on the creature's nose like a rhinoceros horn. Only decades later did scientists realize the spike actually belonged on the thumb. That single mistake shaped public imagination. Early illustrations depicted iguanodon as a bulky, horned reptile that looked nothing like the agile herbivore we now envision. Another example is the megalosaurus, the first dinosaur ever formally described. The original depiction showed it as a gigantic, lumbering lizard crawling on four legs with a dragging belly. Without more complete fossils, scientists could not imagine a world where reptiles walked upright or displayed bird-like posture. This misinterpretation lingered for decades and influenced countless illustrations, stories, and museum exhibits. When new fossils finally shattered that image, it forced an entire shift in how scientists understood dinosaur posture and movement. Perhaps the most iconic story of early paleontological mistakes is the absurd reconstruction of the Elasmosaurus by Edward Drinker Cope during the infamous Bone Wars. Cope, In his haste to publish findings before his rival Othniel, Charles Marsh accidentally mounted the creature's long neck in place of the tail, essentially flipping its anatomy. When Marsh pointed out the error, it triggered a fierce and deeply personal rivalry. Their feud pushed paleontology forward at incredible speed, but it also produced numerous rushed conclusions and incorrect reconstructions. Yet these mistakes were not failures, they were stepping stones. They revealed how passionate and competitive the pursuit of ancient truth had become. Even beyond physical reconstruction, early interpretations of behavior were often imaginative extrapolations. Scientists assumed that dinosaurs were sluggish, cold-blooded, swamp-dwelling beasts because their size seemed incompatible with active lifestyles. This belief persisted for much of the 19th and 20th centuries. Fossils did not inherently suggest such behavior, human assumptions filled the gaps. When scientists later discovered evidence of rapid growth rates, complex nesting behavior, and warm-blooded traits, the old image of dinosaurs collapsed almost overnight. The creatures once portrayed as dim-witted giants became dynamic, intelligent, and adaptive beings. These early errors highlight an important truth: fossils do not come with instructions. They do not provide a complete blueprint. Every reconstruction is an interpretation layered atop incomplete data. An interpretation always carries the risk of bias. In the Victorian era, for instance, scientists viewed evolution as a march of progress. They expected ancient creatures to fit into neat hierarchies, more primitive, less intelligent, and structurally simpler than modern ones. This expectation colored their reconstructions. Dinosaurs, in their eyes, could not be agile or sophisticated. Early humans, they believed, must have been brutish and inferior. These assumptions shaped scientific illustrations, museum displays, and public beliefs for generations. Yet despite their mistakes, early paleontologists achieved something extraordinary: they opened the world's eyes to the depth of time. They revealed that Earth was far older and more diverse than anyone had imagined. Their reconstructions, even when inaccurate, sparked wonder. Children stared at towering skeletons with wide eyes. Artists reimagined prehistoric worlds. Writers crafted stories about creatures that once roamed from pole to pole. These beautiful mistakes invited society to dream bigger. As new tools emerged, radiometric dating, CT scanning, biomolecular analysis, many early interpretations were revised or overturned. But they were never wasted. Each correction deepened our understanding. Every misstep illuminated a better path forward. Science is not a straight line of progress, it is a conversation with the past. Early paleontologists asked bold questions, and their imperfect answers laid the foundation for future breakthroughs. Even today, paleontology continues to evolve. New fossils rewrite textbooks. Old reconstructions are updated as fresh evidence emerges. What we consider accurate now may be viewed as flawed a century from today. But this is not a weakness, it is the strength of a field built on curiosity. Paleontology teaches us that being wrong is not something to fear, it is part of the process of finding deeper truth. The giants built on guesswork were not just the dinosaurs assembled in dusty museums. They were the ideas, towering, imaginative, and ambitious, that shaped our understanding of deep time. They remind us that discovery is a journey filled with uncertainty, creativity, and revision. Through their mistakes, early scientists left behind something far more valuable than perfect reconstructions: they left us the courage to keep exploring. And so the story of paleontology is not a tale of errors, but of evolution, of how our interpretations grow, adapt, and transform just as ancient life once did. The beautiful mistakes of early paleontology are monuments to human curiosity, carved not in stone but in imagination. For as long as fossils of early humans have been uncovered, they have done more than reveal anatomy, they have revealed our desires, fears, and assumptions about what it means to be human. The bones themselves were silent, but the stories we built around them were anything but. From the moment scientists began piecing together our origins, the human narrative was shaped not only by evidence but by the expectations of the societies interpreting it. We did not just search for our ancestors, we searched for a story that made sense to us, one that aligned with our worldview and gave us comfort in our place in history. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, when the study of human evolution was taking shape, the world was dominated by ideas of progress, hierarchy, and linear development. Societies believed in upward movement, technology improving, empires expanding, and humanity advancing steadily from primitive to civilized. These cultural beliefs seeped into scientific interpretations. Early researchers assumed human evolution followed a straight line, one species replacing the last in a clean sequence. When a fossil was discovered, it was often forced into this imagined ladder of progression, even if the evidence suggested something far messier. The iconic image of human evolution, a line of silhouettes gradually standing upright, is a perfect example of this bias. It presents our past as an orderly march toward modernity, with each stage looking slightly more human than the last. But the real story is not a straight line, it is a branching, tangled tree filled with species that existed at the same time, diverged, overlapped, and sometimes interbred. Yet for generations, the simplified ladder persisted because it felt intuitive. It fit the human desire to see ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution, as the inevitable destination of nature's journey. Even the language early scientists used reflected their assumptions. Words like primitive, low, and advanced were not neutral scientific terms, they carried cultural values. A fossil with a small brain case was labeled inferior. A fossil with strong jaws or thick bones was depicted as brutish, aggressive, or animalistic. These descriptions said more about the biases of researchers than the lives of ancient humans. For example, Neanderthals were long portrayed as unintelligent cavemen simply because their skull shape differed from ours. Only in recent decades have we recognized them as sophisticated humans with complex culture, art, and emotional depth. Bias also influenced which fossils were considered important. For decades, discoveries in Europe received far more attention than those from Africa or Asia, despite Africa being the true cradle of humanity. European scientists, consciously or unconsciously, prioritized fossils that supported narratives centered around their own continent. Some even dismissed African fossils as anomalies. This selective attention distorted our understanding of human migration and origin for generations. At times, whole discoveries were interpreted in ways that conveniently aligned with social beliefs. One of the most famous examples is Piltdown Man, an elaborate hoax in which a modern human skull was combined with the jaw of an orangutan. Scientists accepted it for years because it aligned with the preferred idea that human intelligence developed early and originated in Europe. A fossil that contradicted expectations was eagerly embraced without sufficient scrutiny because it fit the story people wanted to believe. Even beyond scientific communities, the public imagination played a role. As soon as early human fossils were displayed, artists were hired to bring them to life. These reconstructions profoundly shaped public perception. A sloping brow was exaggerated to look menacing. A heavy jaw was depicted as bestial. Sparse body hair was replaced with thick, shaggy coats. Expressions were portrayed as vacant or aggressive. These artistic choices, though speculative, became embedded in popular culture and influenced how entire generations viewed early humans. But why were we so eager to believe in a simple, progressive story of human evolution? Perhaps because humans crave coherence. We want a clear beginning, a clear path, and a clear conclusion. A branching evolutionary tree feels chaotic, unstructured, and unsettling. It suggests we are not the final goal of evolution but one of many outcomes, an idea that challenges the ego. A linear progression, however flawed, is comforting. It places humanity at the top, unique and superior. There is also a psychological need to distinguish ourselves from the rest of the animal world. Early interpretations emphasize traits that separated us from them: tool use, bipedalism, culture, while often ignoring evidence that other species shared aspects of these traits. When fossils showed early humans with features that seemed animal-like, scientists interpreted them as primitive. When fossils showed traits resembling modern humans, they were celebrated as advanced. In this way, science was subtly shaped by a desire to define what it means to be human. Over time, as more discoveries challenged the linear model, the story grew more complex, and more honest. We learned that multiple human species coexisted. That intelligence evolved in various forms. That migrations were not single events but waves upon waves of movement. That interbreeding occurred across continental distances. The human past became richer, but also harder to summarize in a simple diagram. This shift in understanding also reflects a shift in attitude. Modern scientists recognize the influence of cultural assumptions and strive to separate them from evidence. They acknowledge that interpretations must remain flexible, open to revision as new finds emerge. The human story is no longer seen as a clean sequence but as a mosaic, diverse, unpredictable, and full of surprises. Yet even today, traces of old beliefs linger in popular culture, textbooks, and casual conversation. People still imagine evolution as a ladder. Still view some ancient humans as inferior. Still cling to simplified narratives. It is difficult to let go of stories that feel so deeply embedded in our identity. Ultimately, the human story we wanted to believe was one of clarity, purpose, and grand ascent. But the true story is far more intriguing. It is chaotic, nonlinear, and filled with forgotten relatives, failed experiments, and unexpected branches. It is a story of resilience, adaptability, and chance rather than destiny. Understanding this does not diminish humanity, it enriches us. It reveals that our origins are not confined to a single line but spread across a vast landscape of possibility. And within that complexity lies a deeper truth: our story is not one of predetermined greatness, but of survival, creativity, and constant transformation. When we look at ancient tools, scattered bones, or faint markings in caves, we aren't just observing evidence, we're interpreting the behavior of beings who lived hundreds of thousands of years ago. But the truth is humbling: we often infer entire lifestyles from fragments that barely whisper any details. Early human behavior is one of the most challenging puzzles in science because fossils rarely tell us how ancient people lived, they only tell us that they existed. And yet, despite this silence, we construct elaborate narratives about family structures, hunting strategies, social hierarchies, and even emotional lives. In many ways, we are staring at shadows on a cave wall, trying to imagine the full world that produced them. Bones and tools survive, but behavior does not. A stone spearhead endures for millennia, but the hands that crafted it, the rituals behind it, the teaching that passed it from generation to generation, all of that vanishes instantly. A burial site might reveal how a person was positioned, but it cannot tell us what stories were told around that grave, or whether tears were shed, or what beliefs guided that final act. The absence of behavioral evidence means that every interpretation risks becoming a projection of our own assumptions. For example, when archaeologists find hearths clustered together, they often assume early humans lived in nuclear family units similar to ours. But hearth placement could have reflected a communal structure, seasonal gathering spots, or temporary shelters unrelated to family boundaries. We imagine behaviors that match modern expectations because it feels intuitive. Our sense of normalcy shapes our descriptions of the ancient world. Even tools, one of the strongest indicators of behavior, can be misleading. A stone blade may suggest hunting, but it could have been used for scraping hides, cutting plants, or even crafting symbolic objects. Without context, function becomes guesswork. And when multiple possibilities exist, scientists must choose the most plausible explanation, often based on modern analogies. This approach is practical, but it carries the risk of oversimplification. Humans today are not perfect reflections of humans in the distant past. The same challenge appears in cave art. A handprint on a cave wall is hauntingly human, but what does it mean? Is it a signature, a symbol, a ritual, or a playful moment frozen in time? We have no direct evidence of the intention behind these marks. When we assign meaning to them, spiritual, artistic, communicative, we are drawing from our own experiences and cultural lenses. We are interpreting through emotion, through imagination, through the shadows of our own minds. The ambiguity becomes even greater when fossils are incomplete. A fragment of a skull might show signs of injury, and scientists may suggest violence, accident, ritual, or disease. But without the broader context of environment and culture, each interpretation remains speculative. When a skeleton is found with evidence of long-term healing, we might assume the individual received care from their group, but this conclusion rests on generalizations about social behavior. Early humans may indeed have shown compassion, but we cannot rely solely on a bone to confirm emotional states. Plato's allegory of the cave becomes a fitting metaphor here. The philosopher described humans as prisoners watching shadows on a wall, mistaking those shadows for reality. In paleontology and archaeology, we too observe shadows, fossils, tools, markings, and attempt to reconstruct entire worlds from them. But the shadows can be deceptive. A single artifact can represent thousands of different stories, and we must be careful not to choose the story simply because it feels coherent. Modern scholars often debate interpretations precisely because the evidence is so thin. One group may view a particular site as proof of organized hunting, another may interpret it as scavenging behavior. Both arguments can seem reasonable because both rely on patterns inferred from incomplete data. This constant tension, between evidence and interpretation, is at the heart of scientific work on ancient humanity. Despite these challenges, our interpretations serve a purpose. They give us a framework to imagine the past, to make sense of our origins, and to ask deeper questions. But the danger lies in certainty. When an interpretation becomes popular, it often transitions from possible to accepted, even if new discoveries later overturn it. For decades, researchers believed early humans lived short, brutal lives with little social structure. More recent evidence suggests complex communication, long-term planning, and cooperative survival. The shadows on the wall remained the same, only the interpretation changed. This fluidity reminds us that ancient people were not simple prototypes of modern humans. They had their own cultures, beliefs, complexities, and emotions, most of which will never be fully understood. They were not blank slates waiting to evolve into us, they were complete beings living rich, meaningful lives in ways we may struggle to imagine. As we study the fragments they left behind, we must balance our desire to understand with humility. The shadows on the cave walls are not lies, they are incomplete truths. They offer glimpses, not portraits. They invite curiosity, not certainty. In the end, interpreting behavior without evidence is an act of careful imagination. It is a journey into the unknown, guided by reason but illuminated by caution. We may never know exactly how our ancestors laughed, mourned, hunted, taught, or dreamed. But in exploring the shadows they left behind, we learn something important about ourselves, that the desire to understand the past is itself a deeply human trait, connecting us across time to the very people we seek to understand. For much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, science and society were obsessed with the idea of a missing link, a single fossil that would neatly connect modern humans to our ape ancestors. This concept became one of the most powerful and misleading ideas in the history of anthropology. It promised clarity, simplicity, and a sense of linear progress. People imagined evolution as a straight ladder, with each rung representing a more advanced being, and they believed one crucial rung had yet to be discovered. This missing link was expected to explain everything: when we became human, how intelligence arose, and what fundamental step separated us from the animals around us. But the very idea of a missing link was built on a misunderstanding of evolution. Evolution is not a ladder, it is a branching tree with countless offshoots, experiments, and dead ends. There is no single transitional species that can neatly connect two distant points in time. Yet because the latter metaphor felt intuitive, the concept captured the public imagination. Newspapers used sensational headlines to make each new fossil seem like the long-awaited discovery. Museums built exhibits that hinted at an inevitable march toward human perfection. And many scientists, influenced by cultural expectations, believed the missing link must be out there waiting to be uncovered. This hunger for a perfect fossil became so strong that it eventually overshadowed scientific caution. In 1912, a discovery in Piltdown, England, seemed to offer the breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. Amateur archaeologist Charles Dawson claimed to have found fragments of a skull and jaw that appeared to combine a modern human cranium with an ape-like jaw. The finding fit perfectly with what researchers expected a missing link to look like. It was hailed as the key to human evolution, proudly displayed, and widely accepted by the scientific community. Yet the Piltdown man was a hoax, one of the most notorious in scientific history. The skull fragments were from a modern human, the jaw belonged to an orangutan that had been deliberately altered to appear ancient. Scientists were misled not because the evidence was convincing, but because they wanted it to be convincing. Piltdown man confirmed existing beliefs, particularly the idea that human evolution had centered in Europe rather than Africa. Confirmation bias clouded judgment, and skepticism weakened in the face of cultural expectations. The Piltdown scandal is often viewed as a failure of scientific rigor, but it is more accurately a lesson in human psychology. People saw what they hoped to see. They filled in gaps with stories that made sense to them. They trusted simplicity over complexity. The hoax persisted for decades, even after fossils like Australopithecus were discovered in Africa, providing a more accurate picture of our origins. Many researchers clung to Piltdown because it aligned with their preferred narrative. When the hoax was finally exposed in 1953 through chemical testing, it forced scientists to confront the biases embedded within the discipline. It highlighted how easily cultural norms, national pride, and expectations could distort scientific reasoning. And it revealed a deeper problem: the entire concept of a missing link had led generations down the wrong path. As anthropology advanced, the notion of a single transitional fossil collapsed. Instead of a clean ladder, researchers uncovered a sprawling family tree with multiple coexisting human species. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Homo naledi, Homo floresiensis, the list grew longer, not clearer. These species did not form a straight line of succession. They overlapped, diverged, and sometimes interbred. The more fossils we found, the more complicated the story became. Rather than a missing link, we discovered that there were countless links, many still missing, others forever lost, and some preserved only in our DNA. The evolution of humans was not a smooth transition but a chaotic mosaic shaped by climate, migration, adaptation, and chance. The rise of genetic research further dismantled the latter metaphor. DNA revealed that traits we once saw as purely linear markers of progress, like brain size or tool use, evolved in diverse, unpredictable patterns. Intelligence did not suddenly appear. Bipedalism did not instantly define humanity. Culture did not emerge from one spark but from many. Despite this, the idea of a missing link still persists in popular culture. It shows up in documentaries, headlines, and casual conversations. The phrase is appealing because it simplifies complexity into a digestible narrative. When a new fossil is discovered, people instinctively ask whether it is the missing link, even though scientists have spent decades explaining that no such singular entity exists. This enduring fascination speaks to a deeper human desire. We crave clean explanations, clear transitions, and a sense of linear identity. But the true story of human evolution is far more fascinating than the myth of a missing link. It is the story of branching paths, unexpected turns, and long-lost relatives who contributed to our genetic, cultural, and anatomical heritage. It is the story of species that flourished and vanished, leaving behind traces that challenge our assumptions. It is a reminder that humanity is not the inevitable outcome of evolution but one of many possible outcomes. The rise and fall of the missing link teaches us that scientific understanding must evolve alongside evidence. It shows that bold ideas must be questioned, not protected. And it reminds us that complexity is not the enemy of knowledge, oversimplification is. Rather than searching for a single fossil to define our origins, we now recognize that the truth lies in a vast network of discoveries, each revealing a small piece of a much larger puzzle. The missing link was never a real fossil. It was a reflection of our desire for certainty, a shadow cast by our longing for a simple story. And when that shadow faded, it revealed something richer, more intricate, and far more human than we ever expected. Nature does not set out to deceive us, but the geological world is so dynamic, so chaotic, and so indifferent to our desire for clarity that bones can easily end up telling a story that never happened. Fossils seem like anchors of truth, but the environments that preserve them are constantly shifting, mixing, erasing, and rearranging the evidence. This means that even when scientists work with genuine fossils, not hoaxes or misidentifications, the rocks themselves can create illusions. Bones can lie without ever meaning to, simply because the world that buried them was always in motion. Picture a river thousands or millions of years ago. A flood sweeps across the landscape, carrying branches, debris, and the bodies of animals that died at different times and in different places. As the water slows, these remains settle together in the same sediment layer. To a future paleontologist, uncovering those bones side by side might suggest that these creatures interacted, or even lived in the same period, when in reality they never met. A predator may appear to have hunted prey it never saw. Two species might seem to share habitat despite living generations apart. A single catastrophic event can merge unrelated fragments into one misleading snapshot. Caves create another kind of natural deception. Many early human fossils were discovered in caves, but caves are not tidy, organized archives. They are dynamic traps. Animals fall in, water flows through, sediment shifts, and rocks collapse. Bones can move deeper or higher over time. Layers can become jumbled as erosion cuts through older deposits. A skeleton found at the bottom might not represent a deliberate burial, it might simply be the endpoint of gravity pulling scattered remains downward. Without recognizing this, scientists may attribute cultural meaning to what is simply geological chance. Even the ground itself can create contradictions. Over long periods, earth layers bend, fold, and tilt due to tectonic forces. Sedimentary layers that were once horizontal become angled or overturned. Fossils that should be found below end up above, making species appear much younger or older than they really were. In some regions, lava flows and ash deposits create natural timestamps, but erosion can remove sections of these layers, creating false impressions of biological gaps or sudden appearances. When researchers encounter this geological patchwork, it can be difficult to determine whether a species truly emerged abruptly or whether the rock record simply erased its earlier existence. One of the most deceptive processes is intrusive burial. This occurs when an animal dies and is buried in sediments that later erode into older layers. The fossil ends up surrounded by rock much older than itself. If scientists don't catch this, they might mistakenly conclude that the species lived earlier than it actually did. This kind of error can reshape evolutionary timelines, suggest relationships that never existed, or create phantom ancestors, a powerful reminder of how fragile our interpretations can be. Taphonomy, the science of how organisms decay and become fossilized, has shown us that nature rarely preserves scenes exactly as they were. Some bones may be transported far from their originals, others may be destroyed completely. Hard, durable bones survive better than delicate ones, which means predators with strong jaws may appear more common than prey with fragile skeletons. Aquatic animals may dominate the fossil record simply because water environments are more conducive to preservation. These biases create distorted views of past ecosystems. An environment that seems predator-heavy may have been balanced in life. A place that appears empty may once have been bustling with soft-bodied species that left no trace. Weather, erosion, and pressure also change the appearance of fossils. A skull flattened by millions of years of geological compression may look more primitive than it was. A bone eroded on one side may mimic a trauma or pathology. Minerals seeping into fossils can discolor or distort them, giving false impressions of disease or unusual traits. Even footprints can shift in shape as sediments compress or crack, making gait analysis difficult or misleading. Volcanic regions, which often produce stunningly detailed fossils, can also confuse interpretation. An eruption can bury animals that had already died, mixing ancient bones with freshly killed ones. Ash layers might contain fossils from multiple events, not a single moment. And pyroclastic flows can transport remains long distances, depositing them far from their original location. A beautifully preserved fossil might appear to represent natural death, but it could be the product of transport, violence, or dislocation caused purely by geological forces. There is also the problem of absence. Some species existed in great numbers but lived in environments that destroyed evidence. Others appear to flourish suddenly in the fossil record, not because they truly exploded in population but because their habitats finally intersected with conditions favorable for preservation. Conversely, species may seem to vanish abruptly, creating the illusion of extinction, when they simply moved into a region that did not fossilize well. These gaps, created not by biology but by geology, can mislead even the most careful researcher into believing in sudden evolutionary events that never occurred. What makes geological trickery so powerful is that the fossils themselves are real. The bones are genuine, the sediments are ancient, the layers are part of Earth's authentic history. The deception arises from context, the where, when, and how of burial. Without careful analysis, the story told by the rocks may seem coherent when it is actually an illusion created by chance. But modern science has grown wiser. Paleontologists now study the geological setting of fossils as carefully as the bones themselves. They analyze sediment flow, mineral content, erosion patterns, and stratigraphy to determine how remains moved after death. They use microscopic abrasion marks to identify whether bones were transported by water, scavengers, or tectonic shifts. They use radiometric dating of surrounding materials, not just fossils, to reconstruct timelines with far greater accuracy. Still, uncertainties remain. The Earth has erased far more evidence than it has preserved, and what survives is often altered by time. Geological trickery reminds us that fossils are not simple facts but complex artifacts shaped by nature's restless processes. The bones do not lie maliciously, they mislead by accident. And understanding this is essential for understanding the past. It teaches us caution, patience, and humility. It reminds us that every fossil discovery is a mystery, not a conclusion. Each bone is a witness, but not always a reliable one. In the end, the story written in the rocks is both beautiful and imperfect. Geological forces sculpted the fossils we rely on, but they also obscured the truth we seek. To read the ancient world correctly, we must learn not only to study the bones but to decode the earth that surrounds them. In the vast timeline of life on Earth, there are entire evolutionary paths that exist only as shadows, ghost lineages inferred through genetics, comparative anatomy, or gaps in the fossil record. These are species we know must have existed because their descendants exist, yet no physical trace of them has ever been found. They are the silent travelers of deep time, the unrecorded branches on evolution's sprawling tree. Their absence is not just a scientific puzzle, it is a profound reminder of how much of Earth's history lies beyond our reach. A ghost lineage forms when a species appears suddenly in the fossil record with advanced traits that could not have developed overnight. For such traits to exist, there must have been earlier species, ancestors and transitional forms, that carried the beginnings of these adaptations. But if those ancestors lived in environments hostile to fossilization, or if their remains were destroyed by geological processes, we may never find their bones. Instead, we are left with evolutionary hints, a structural feature here, a genetic clue there, a surprising divergence in a DNA sequence. From these pieces, scientists infer the existence of entire lineages we have never seen. One of the most striking examples involves the origins of modern birds. Birds appear in the fossil record with features so specialized, feathers, lightweight bones, advanced respiratory systems, that their ancestors must have been experimenting with these traits long before birds emerged. Yet for decades, the transitional species that bridged dinosaurs and true birds were missing. Only sparse fossils hinted at feathered dinosaurs. Today we have more evidence, but gaps remain, millions of years where evolutionary innovation must have occurred, but the fossils are silent. Human evolution is also filled with ghost lineages. Genetic studies reveal that modern humans carry traces of hominin species whose fossils have never been identified. The Denisovans, for example, were first discovered through DNA extracted from a finger bone fragment and a few teeth. Their genome revealed a complex and widespread population that interbred with our ancestors across Asia. Yet to this day, almost no skeletal remains have been found. The Denisovans existed, thrived, migrated, and influenced human evolution, yet they remain almost entirely physically invisible. They are a perfect ghost lineage, their presence confirmed not by fossils but by the genetic footprints they left inside us. There are even lineages older than hominins inferred from DNA that have left no bones behind. Genetic divergence suggests that many ancient populations split, evolved separately for thousands of generations, and eventually died out without leaving fossils or recognizable artifacts. These populations shaped the genetic landscape of humanity, yet we know them only through statistical signals hidden deep within our genomes. Ghost lineages exist not only for animals but for entire ecosystems. Plant fossils are particularly prone to disappearance, especially in humid or acidic environments. As a result, whole forests, evolutionary experiments, and transitions between major plant groups exist only as hypotheses. Scientists often trace lineage through pollen grains, tiny, durable particles that survived when the plants themselves did not. But pollen can only tell us so much. The broader picture remains blurry, with ghost forests haunting our reconstructions of ancient landscapes. What makes ghost lineages so fascinating is that they represent certainty without presence. We know these organisms existed because the logic of evolution demands it. A modern species cannot appear out of nowhere, it must have ancestors. When those ancestors vanish from the fossil record, they leave behind an outline, a negative space that scientists must fill with reasoning. The fossil record, therefore, is not just a record of what existed, it is a record of what did not get preserved. The concept of ghost lineages fundamentally challenges the way we visualize evolution. Instead of a neatly connected chain of fossils, we are confronted with a broken mosaic. The pieces we have may be accurate, but they are separated by vast distances of time and missing evidence. This requires scientists to become detectives, piecing together indirect clues to reconstruct invisible histories. They analyze traits that appear unexpectedly. They compare species separated by millions of years. They examine DNA mutation rates to estimate when lineages split. Each method adds a stroke to an unseen portrait. But ghost lineages also teach humility. They remind us that the fossil record is deeply biased and incomplete. The story of life is not written entirely in stone, most of it has crumbled away or was never preserved. We often imagine the fossil record as a grand archive, but it is really a scattering of surviving pages from a book that was mostly burned, soaked, or torn apart. The existence of ghost lineages forces us to acknowledge how much we do not know. These unseen ancestors also expand our imagination. They encourage us to think beyond the fossils in our museums and consider how many forms of life never left physical marks. What did these creatures look like? How did they behave? What environments shaped their evolution? Each ghost lineage represents a world lost to time, yet still influential enough to shape the living descendants around us. In a way, ghost lineages are poetic. They symbolize the quiet persistence of life, continuing in the shadows even when the geological world does not cooperate. They remind us that absence is not emptiness, that unseen histories can be just as important as recorded ones. The past is filled with beings we will never meet, but whose echoes still resonate through the species alive today. The evolution we cannot see is often as important as the evolution we can. Ghost lineages fill the spaces between the dots of the fossil record, stitching together a story written partly in bone and partly in the invisible currents of genetics and deep time. And though we may never find their fossils, their presence lingers, haunting, guiding, and expanding our understanding of life's grand, unfinished tapestry. When the first Neanderthal fossil was discovered in 1856, it should have been a moment of enlightenment, a window into another branch of humanity, a chance to understand our closest evolutionary relatives. Instead, that single skeleton became the foundation for one of the most persistent misconceptions in the study of human origins. Because the fossil was misinterpreted, misrepresented, and shaped by 19th-century biases, Neanderthals were cast as brutish, unintelligent cavemen for more than a century. One fossil, just one, was enough to distort our view of an entire species. The fossil in question was found in the Neander Valley of Germany. When scientists examined the bones, they saw a thick brow ridge, a sloping forehead, and a robust frame unlike modern humans. But what they did not realize, or did not consider seriously, was that the individual likely suffered from arthritis and other physical stresses. His bent posture and unusual skeletal features were partly due to disease, not primitive anatomy. Yet early anthropologists seized upon the idea that Neanderthals were hunched, ape-like beings. They believed this fossil represented a transitional form, a crude attempt by evolution to create humans, a step below us on the ladder of progress. The cultural context amplified the error. Europe in the 19th century was steeped in ideas of racial hierarchy and evolutionary progression. People wanted to believe that modern Europeans were the pinnacle of evolution, while earlier human species were inferior. When the Neanderthal fossil appeared, it conveniently fit this narrative. Scientists saw what they expected to see: a failed human, a creature too primitive to survive, a relic of a less advanced age. These assumptions were not based on compelling evidence, they were based on cultural beliefs disguised as scientific interpretation. This bias shaped early reconstructions of Neanderthals, which were wildly inaccurate. Artists portrayed them with stooped backs, shaggy hair, vacant expressions, and brutish features. Their limbs were drawn awkwardly, as though they lacked full control. Their faces were exaggerated to appear more animal than human. Museums displayed them as crude cave dwellers who could barely think beyond survival. Once these images entered the public mind, they were difficult to erase. For decades, students and scholars alike grew up believing Neanderthals were dull, slow, and extinct because they couldn't compete with the superior Homo sapiens. But the truth, when we finally uncovered it, was far richer and far more human. As additional fossils emerged across Europe and the Middle East, it became clear that Neanderthals were not hunched at all. They walked upright, used their bodies efficiently, and were incredibly strong. Their bones were thick because their lifestyle demanded it. Hunting large animals in cold environments required power and resilience. Their skull shape, once seen as primitive, was simply different, adapted to their own ecological niche. They were not less evolved, they were evolved for a different world. Archaeological evidence revealed even more surprises. Neanderthals crafted sophisticated tools, not just simple stone flakes. They controlled fire, built shelters, and hunted cooperatively in groups. They cared for their sick and elderly, as evidenced by skeletons showing long-healed injuries that would have required communal support. They buried their dead intentionally, possibly with symbolic objects. They created pigments and may have produced simple art. Their behavior was not primitive, it was deeply human. Genetics delivered the final blow to the old myths. The sequencing of Neanderthal DNA proved that they were not an inferior species that failed to compete. Instead, they interbred with early modern humans. Today, billions of people carry Neanderthal genes in their DNA. These genes influence immune responses, skin pigmentation, metabolism, and even brain function. Neanderthals did not disappear because they were outcompete, they merged into the expanding populations of Homo sapiens. Their legacy lives on in us. Yet the Neanderthal illusion persisted for so long because early science was shaped by a desire for simple narratives. We wanted a clear separation between us and them, a single line of progress without side branches. Neanderthals complicated that story. They were too similar, too close, too human. So we created an illusion, one that allowed us to maintain our sense of exceptionalism. This illusion had lasting consequences. For generations, textbooks taught students that Neanderthals were evolutionary dead ends. Popular culture depicted them as grunting, dim-witted brutes. Even modern media often reinforces this outdated image. But today's scientific understanding paints a radically different picture. Neanderthals were intelligent, adaptable, emotionally complex, and fully human in many ways. Their extinction was not a failure, it was a blending. The story of the Neanderthal illusion is not just a tale of scientific error, it is a lesson about how cultural biases shape our interpretations of the past. The first fossil was misread not because the evidence was unclear, but because the world was not yet ready to accept that humanity had relatives who were our equals. It took decades of discoveries, corrections, and humility before the illusion finally shattered. Ironically, Neanderthals have now become symbols of empathy, cooperation, and resilience. Their image has transformed from savage to sophisticated, from primitive to profound. This shift reflects not only better science but a broader cultural change. We are more open to understanding humanity as a diverse, branching family rather than a linear hierarchy. In the end, Neanderthals teach us something deeper than evolutionary history. They remind us that first impressions, especially those built on limited evidence, can be dangerously misleading. They remind us that science is shaped by human perspectives and must constantly question its own assumptions. And they show us that the truth, when finally revealed, is often far more beautiful and complex than the stories we once believed. The Neanderthal illusion faded as evidence grew, but its lesson remains clear. The past is easy to distort when we see it through the lens of what we expect, rather than what the evidence truly says. Some prehistoric stories survive not because of chance, but because of catastrophe. Volcanic eruptions, sudden floods, and rapid burial events have preserved snapshots of ancient life with astonishing clarity. Ash can capture a moment the way a photograph does, freezing creatures in their final positions, preserving footprints mid-stride, and sealing delicate structures that would normally decay within hours. These rare moments give us some of the most detailed and accurate fossils ever discovered. And yet, even when the preservation is perfect, our interpretations are not. The fossils may be telling the truth, but often we are reading that truth through the lens of modern assumptions. One of the most famous examples is Pompeii, a human tragedy but a scientific gift. There, volcanic ash preserved bodies, buildings, and even expressions. But Pompeii happened only 2,000 years ago, close enough that we understand its cultural context. When we find similar ash-preserved scenes from millions of years earlier, we do not have that luxury. A fossilized creature frozen in place may look like it died peacefully, when in reality it might have been fleeing for its life. A cluster of animals preserved together might suggest social behavior, but it could just as easily reflect panic, coincidence, or geological movement after death. The ash captures the moment perfectly, it is our interpretation that can drift. Ash layers also preserve ecosystems with incredible detail. A single eruption can bury entire forests, rivers, and lakes in minutes, preserving fish, insects, leaves, pollen, and even soft tissues. These fossils can seem so complete that they tempt us into thinking we understand the full ecological picture. But what we see is not an average day in the life of an ancient world, it is the moment of disaster. Species that happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time become overrepresented, giving the illusion of abundance. Rare species might appear common, while common species that lived in different microhabitats vanish from the record entirely. The ash gives us a snapshot, but not a balanced portrait. Even exquisitely preserved fossils can mislead when removed from the larger geological context. A beautifully intact skeleton might appear undisturbed, but it could have been repositioned by water or volcanic blasts. A dinosaur preserved in a curled posture might look like it died peacefully, but that position could be the result of post-mortem contraction. A fish fossil with its mouth open might seem to be gasping for air, but the expression could have formed after death due to chemical or pressure changes. These fine details, though preserved with photographic precision, do not always reflect behavior or cause of death. One striking example comes from volcanic lake deposits where thousands of fish are preserved in perfect detail, lying side by side. At first glance, this looks like evidence of mass schooling behavior or synchronized death. But more detailed analysis revealed seasonal changes in lake chemistry that periodically suffocated the fish. What appears to be evidence of social behavior is actually evidence of environmental collapse. The fossils recorded the truth faithfully, but our first reading of the scene was wrong. The same problem occurs in ash-preserved trackways. Footprints preserved in volcanic mud can show extraordinary precision, individual toe impressions, skin textures, even slipping motions. These tracks are often used to interpret group behavior, gait, speed, and even emotional states such as panic or calmness. Yet interpreting movement from footprints is far more complex than it appears. A spacing that suggests running might actually reflect a slow climb uphill. A group of footprints that appears to represent a family might simply reflect individuals passing the same spot at different times. Without careful analysis, we may project stories onto the tracks that never happened. Fossils preserved in ash can also distort our understanding of morphology. Soft tissues preserved through carbonization or mineral replacement can appear flattened or stretched. Colors, patterns, and even shapes can shift during preservation. When early feathers were discovered preserved in volcanic ash in China, paleontologists initially misinterpreted some of them as frills or skin structures. Only later, with better tools and comparisons, did we realize they were feathers. The fossils were accurate, but our reading of them had to evolve. The deeper challenge lies in the emotional weight of perfect fossils. When preservation is extraordinary, we feel closer to the ancient world. A dinosaur lying as though asleep, a mammal curled around its young, two creatures seemingly locked in combat, these scenes feel intimate, even sacred. But emotion can cloud interpretation. We may assume nurturing behavior where none existed, or dramatize violence based on a pose that was purely coincidental. The ash records the moment of death, not the moment of life. This does not diminish the value of ash-preserved fossils. On the contrary, they are among our most precious scientific treasures. But their perfection can be seductive. We forget that even the clearest snapshot is still a single frame from a vast, complex story. Without context, even perfect data can be misleading. Modern paleontology approaches these fossils with more caution than ever before. Scientists study sediment flow patterns, ash layering, mineral distribution, and chemical signatures to reconstruct not just the moment captured in ash, but the minutes, hours, or days before and after. They use microscopic analysis to determine whether bones shifted post-mortem. They compare behavior inferred from ash fossils with modern analogues to avoid overinterpretation. And they are increasingly aware of the narrative temptations that come with dramatic scenes. In the end, fossils preserved in ash remind us of a profound truth: nature sometimes gives us perfect information, but humans still interpret it imperfectly. The tale written in ash is not wrong, it is incomplete. It captures the final chapter of many lives, but not the full book. To read it correctly, we must acknowledge the limits of our vision, the biases of our assumptions, and the humility required to understand a world long gone. Ash preserves beautifully, but beauty is not clarity, unless we learn how to see with caution, patience, and scientific restraint. For every ancient species we have discovered, there are countless others that vanished without leaving a single trace. These are the invisible ancestors, creatures whose bodies dissolved in environments too acidic, too warm, or too dynamic for preservation. They lived full lives, shaped ecosystems, hunted, bred, adapted, and died, yet the geological record holds no memory of them. Their absence is not a reflection of their insignificance but of nature's indifference toward recording history. And because they left no bones behind, our understanding of evolution is incomplete in ways we can hardly fathom. Soft-bodied species are the most obvious victims of this erasure. Jellyfish, worms, early chordates, and delicate marine organisms dominated Earth's oceans for hundreds of millions of years, yet very few of them fossilized. Their bodies lacked the hard parts, bones, shells, teeth, that survive burial and mineralization. Even today, the majority of animal species lack internal skeletons, but you would never guess this by looking at the fossil record, which is dominated by creatures with durable structures. In many ecosystems, the most abundant life forms left the least physical evidence. This invisibility extends to early human ancestors as well. Many hominin species likely evolved in warm, forested regions where acidic soil rapidly destroyed bones. Tropical environments, despite being hotspots of biodiversity, are some of the worst places for fossil preservation. If a species spent most of its existence in such regions, it might have flourished for tens of thousands of years without leaving a single bone for us to discover. Our evolutionary tree is therefore not just unfinished, it is missing entire branches we may never know existed. Even species with bones can vanish from the record if they lived in environments hostile to fossilization. Floodplains, mountain forests, and coastal regions constantly rework sediments, scattering remains before they can be buried. Insects, bacteria, and scavengers break down bodies quickly, leaving only traces that disappear within days. Fossilization requires an extraordinary alignment of conditions, and most creatures never experience such luck. When we hold a fossil in our hands, we are holding a statistical miracle, not a representative example of ancient life. This loss shapes our understanding in subtle but profound ways. When scientists try to reconstruct ancient ecosystems, they can only work with the species that left physical evidence. This creates the illusion that ecosystems were dominated by large, durable-bodied creatures when in reality they may have been structured around fragile species that left no trace. Entire predator-prey networks, migration patterns, and ecological interactions may have been missed because the key players vanished without fossils. The absence is even more striking when we consider the origins of complex traits. Many evolutionary innovations must have begun in species that left no bones behind. The earliest experiments with nervous systems, digestive systems, mobility, and sensory perception occurred in soft-bodied creatures whose fossils are almost non-existent. The evolutionary steps that eventually led to humans took place through lineages we cannot see, in species that dissolved into the soil long before geology had a chance to preserve them. This invisibility affects how we interpret the timeline of human evolution. When a new hominin fossil appears that seems unexpectedly advanced or unexpectedly primitive, it may reflect not a sudden evolutionary leap but simply the erasure of intermediate forms. We often speak of missing links, but in truth, entire populations, species, and lineages are missing. The fossil record is like a book with most chapters torn out. The chapters that remain may be accurate, but the story feels disjointed because we lack the connective tissue that once held it together. The invisible ancestors also challenge our confidence in evolutionary reconstructions. When we build family trees, map migrations, or propose relationships between species, we do so based on the data we have, not the data that existed. A species that appears to emerge suddenly might have a long, complex history hidden behind a wall of geological silence. A species that seems to disappear abruptly may have continued elsewhere, in regions where fossils could not form. Our interpretations often rely on absence, but absence is not evidence, it is simply silence. Yet the absence itself is meaningful. It forces scientists to use indirect methods to uncover the past. Genetics, for example, can reveal relationships that fossils never show. By comparing DNA across species, researchers can infer the existence of ancestral populations whose bodies are long gone. These genetic ghosts help fill some of the blanks left by the fossil record. Chemical signatures, ecological modeling, and comparisons with modern species also help reconstruct what we cannot see. Though bones are missing, clues remain scattered across biology, ready to be decoded. Still, there is a poetic sadness in knowing that most ancient species are lost forever. The world that shaped our origins, a world filled with invisible ancestors, exists now only as imagination and inference. These ancestors walked through forests, swam in ancient seas, raised young, fought for survival, and shaped evolutionary trajectories that ripple into the present. Their lives were as real as ours, but the earth chose not to remember them. In embracing this silence, we learn humility. The fossil record does not show all of history, it shows only what survived the whims of geology. The invisible ancestors remind us that our understanding of evolution is a tentative outline, not a complete portrait. They remind us that the world was once filled with forms and possibilities we cannot even picture. And they challenge us to imagine a past far richer, stranger, and more diverse than any fossil bed could ever reveal. Though they left no bones behind, the invisible ancestors live on in the shape of every organism alive today, including us. For decades, scientists believed they had a fairly clear outline of the human evolutionary story, a tidy progression from ape-like ancestors to increasingly modern forms, culminating in Homo sapiens. But every so often, a discovery emerges that shatters the neatness of that narrative. Fossils appear in places no one expected, belonging to species no one predicted, with combinations of traits that make no sense within the traditional framework. Each new find forces us to redraw the human family tree, revealing it not as a straight line but a tangled web of branches, dead ends, and surprising connections. These discoveries don't just update our understanding, they fundamentally challenge our assumptions about what it means to be human. One of the most disruptive discoveries was Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbit, found on the Indonesian island of Flores in 2003. Standing barely over a meter tall, with tiny brains but surprisingly advanced stone tools, these beings didn't fit anywhere on the expected evolutionary chart. Their anatomy suggested incredible complexity, primitive in some ways, advanced in others. Some scientists argued at first that they must be diseased humans. Others proposed that they were descendants of ancient hominins who evolved into a dwarf form due to island pressures. Whatever the explanation, this tiny species forced researchers to accept that human evolution produced not just large, brainy species, but also small, unexpected forms that thrived in isolation. The Hobbit reminded the world that evolution does not follow our preferences, it explores whatever paths circumstances allow. Then came the Denisovans. Unlike most ancient humans, they were identified not from an impressive skull or dramatic skeleton but from a single finger bone and a few teeth found in Siberia's Denisova cave. When their DNA was sequenced, it proved to be so distinct from both modern humans and Neanderthals that researchers realized they had uncovered a completely new branch of humanity, one that had left a genetic legacy across Asia and Oceania. The Denisovans were physically invisible for years because almost no skeletal remains were found. Yet their DNA lived on in millions of people, shaping traits like immune response and adaptation to high altitude. These discoveries revealed that our ancestors did not exist in isolation. They met, mingled, competed, and interbred with multiple human species. The family tree became not a tree at all, but a braided river with channels splitting and rejoining across time. Another shock arrived with Australopithecus sediba, discovered in South Africa in 2008. The species displayed a mosaic of traits, a small brain but modern-like hands, primitive feet attached to surprisingly advanced hips, ape-like shoulders paired with human-like teeth. Sediba didn't fit neatly into the transition between Australopithecus and Homo. Instead, It suggested there may have been several species experimenting with traits that would later define humans, precursors of tool use, walking upright, and changes in diet. This challenged the long-held idea of a single, linear path toward Homo sapiens. Evolution does not move steadily forward, it tests multiple solutions, many of which never survive long enough to leave extensive fossil traces. Homo-nality added even more complexity. Discovered in the Rising Star Cave system, this species possessed a strange combination of characteristics: small brains, curved fingers adapted for climbing, and skull shapes reminiscent of early hominins, yet with feet, ankles, and wrists strikingly similar to modern humans. What puzzled scientists even more was the age of the fossils. Nality was far younger than expected, living at a time when early Homo sapiens already existed. How could such a primitive-looking species survive alongside more advanced humans? And why did their fossils appear deep in difficult-to-access cave chambers? Some researchers suggested deliberate body disposal, an astonishingly complex behavior for such a small-brained species. Whether or not that interpretation holds, Nality reminded us that brain size is not the sole measure of sophistication, and that evolution's experiments can persist far longer than expected. These discoveries collectively dismantled older narratives built around linear progress and hierarchy. Instead of a single ancestor branching neatly into modern humans, we see overlapping species coexisting across continents. Some competed. Some interbred. Some likely ignored each other entirely. The human past was not a single story but a collection of stories, many now lost to time. Even Homo sapiens, the species that likes to view itself as the triumphant end point, turns out to be part of a much broader tapestry. Our ancestors inherited genes from Neanderthals and Denisovans. We may carry traces of other unknown hominin groups whose fossils have yet to be discovered or recognized. As genetic technology advances, more ghost ancestors appear in our DNA, suggesting that the human tree is even more complex than the fossils alone reveal. These revelations also highlight the biases embedded in earlier interpretations. For decades, the scientific community tended to view traits like brain size, tool complexity, and upright posture as markers of progress, assuming that evolution drives species toward increasing intelligence. The discoveries of small-brained but sophisticated species challenge this assumption. Intelligence evolves according to need, not direction. A species may retain primitive traits while developing complex behaviors. Another may evolve advanced anatomy without developing symbolic culture. The old ladder model collapses under the weight of new data. Furthermore, the geographic spread of fossils forces us to revise our understanding of where key evolutionary events occurred. Africa remains the cradle of humanity, but evidence from Asia and Europe reveals parallel developments, independent innovations, and migrations far earlier than once believed. Human evolution was not centralized, it was distributed, dynamic, and unpredictable. This ever-changing picture can feel destabilizing. Every new discovery seems to rewrite textbooks, forcing scientists to abandon theories once considered foundational. But this constant revision is not a flaw, it is the essence of scientific progress. The human family tree is not being destroyed, it is being revealed in its true complexity. Every new branch, every unexpected species, every surprising genetic connection brings us closer to understanding the richness of our origins. These discoveries also invite a philosophical shift. They challenge the notion that Homo sapiens is uniquely destined or superior. Instead, we are one thread in a vast woven fabric of humanity, lucky survivors of a lineage full of creativity, adaptability, and chance. The extinct branches of our family tree are not failures, they are experiments in being human. In the end, redrawing the human family tree is not just about updating diagrams in textbooks. It is about embracing the idea that our story is one of diversity, coexistence, and unexpected twists. It is a lesson in humility. We are not the inevitable outcome of evolution, but one of many possible expressions of what it means to be human. The more we discover, the clearer it becomes that the past was far messier, richer, and more astonishing than we ever imagined, and that our family tree is still very much unfinished. Every fossil begins as a piece of the earth, but the moment a human scientist touches it, that fossil also becomes a piece of culture. Our interpretations are never made in a vacuum. They are shaped by the worldviews, assumptions, and unconscious biases of the people studying them. Paleontology, anthropology, and archaeology are scientific disciplines, but they are also deeply human ones, filled with emotions, expectations, and cultural narratives that seep into the way we read the past. Bias is not always intentional, often, it is invisible even to the scientist who carries it. But its influence can echo for decades, shaping entire theories about human origins. One of the most persistent cultural biases has been the idea of progress, the belief that evolution moves from lesser to greater, from primitive to advanced, from simple to superior. This idea did not come from fossils, it came from human social attitudes during the Victorian era, when industrialization and empire created a belief in human exceptionalism. Scientists living in such a society naturally projected these ideas onto the fossil record. They expected early species to be crude and inferior, and so they interpreted any primitive-looking feature as a sign of inferiority rather than difference. For generations, the study of human evolution was filtered through this lens, turning complex branching lineages into a single ascending ladder. Eurocentrism also shaped interpretation. For a long time, European scientists assumed that the most important stages of human evolution must have occurred in Europe. Fossils found elsewhere, in Africa, Asia, or Oceania, were often dismissed, misdated, or undervalued. The idea that humanity's roots lay in Africa faced enormous resistance, even as strong evidence accumulated. It took decades for the scientific community to accept that the cradle of humanity was not in France or Germany but on the African continent. This shift was not merely academic, it required dismantling deep-seated cultural assumptions about civilization, race, and the geographical hierarchy of human worth. Gender bias, too, shaped interpretations of early human behavior. For years, scientists assumed men were the primary drivers of evolution, hunters, inventors, leaders, while women played secondary roles. This perspective influenced how tools were interpreted, how social structures were imagined, and how fossils were portrayed. For example, the idea of man the hunter dominated early interpretations, despite the fact that many modern hunter-gatherer societies rely heavily on plant gathering, often performed by women, for their survival. The assumption that men were the core evolutionary force was rooted in modern gender norms, not in evidence. More recent studies reveal a far more balanced, cooperative, and flexible division of labor among early humans. Another source of bias lies in how scientists classify fossils. When two fossils look different, researchers might classify them as separate species, even when the differences could simply be variation within a population. Conversely, fossils with similar features might be grouped together despite belonging to distinct lineages. These choices often reflect cultural expectations about how diverse the human past should be. For much of the 20th century, scientists preferred simplicity, grouping hominins into a few major species. Today, the trend leans toward recognizing diversity, identifying many more species based on subtler distinctions. Both approaches carry risks of bias. One simplifies the past too much, the other may fragment it unnecessarily. Even the language used in scientific papers reflects bias. Terms like primitive, advanced, archaic, or modern carry value judgments. A fossil with a smaller brain might be labeled primitive, even if that brain was perfectly adapted to its environment. A species with unique features might be called aberrant or strange, implying deviation from a norm that is defined by modern humans. These linguistic habits shape how both scientists and the public perceive ancient species, subtly reinforcing the idea that Homo sapiens is the standard and all other species are incomplete steps toward us. Cultural biases have influenced interpretations of symbolic behavior as well. For decades, scientists believed that artistic expression, ritual, and abstract thought originated exclusively with modern humans. When Neanderthals appeared to engage in similar behaviors, burying their dead, collecting pigments, crafting ornaments, researchers often downplayed or questioned the evidence. Many assumed Neanderthals imitated Homo sapiens rather than developing such behaviors independently. This assumption came not from fossils but from the belief that only our species could possess sophisticated minds. Only recently has this prejudice started to fade, opening the door to a more nuanced understanding of Neanderthal culture. The bias of expectations can also distort gaps in the fossil record. When fossils seem to tell a simple story, scientists may unconsciously favor interpretations that maintain simplicity. When fossils complicate the narrative, those complications may be dismissed as anomalies. The Piltdown Man hoax succeeded for decades because it reinforced the cultural idea that intelligence arose early in Europe. By contrast, fossils from Africa that challenged the European narrative were often regarded with skepticism. Even technology introduces new biases. CT scans, computer models, and DNA sequencing offer astonishing clarity, but they also create an illusion of certainty. When a machine produces an image or a genetic map, it feels authoritative, yet the interpretation still depends on human judgment. A digital reconstruction of a skull may reflect the assumptions built into the software. A DNA sequence may reveal relationships but cannot tell us about behavior or culture. Technology expands our knowledge, but it cannot eliminate the human lens through which we view the past. Bias is not a flaw unique to science, it is a feature of being human. What matters is how science responds to it. Today, researchers are increasingly aware of the cultural, historical, and personal assumptions that shape their interpretations. They question earlier narratives, challenge convenient explanations, and embrace the complexity of human evolution rather than forcing it into neat diagrams. Bias cannot be removed entirely, but it can be recognized, examined, and counterbalanced through collaboration, diverse perspectives, and openness to revision. In the end, the stones we study may be ancient, but the stories we tell about them are modern. The fossils themselves are neutral, they cannot lie or tell the truth. It is the human mind, creative, curious, flawed, and hopeful, that gives them meaning. And as long as we acknowledge this, we can approach the past with greater humility, understanding that our interpretations say as much about us as they do about the worlds we are trying to reconstruct. When we study human fossils, we often focus on measurements, cranial capacity, femur length, dental wear, bone robustness. These details are essential for science, but they can obscure the truth that each fossil once belonged to a living individual with fears, dreams, relationships, and experiences. Bones tell us how ancient humans died, but they rarely tell us how they lived. And yet, if we look closely, beyond the scientific terminology and anatomical diagrams, we can glimpse the humanity embedded in even the smallest fragment of bone. We begin to see not specimens, but people. Imagine a Neanderthal child whose bones show signs of prolonged illness. The fact that the child survived long enough for the disease to leave marks tells us that someone cared for them. Someone carried them, fed them, protected them. Another skeleton shows an adult with a crushed limb that had healed. Such an injury would have left the person unable to hunt or defend themselves. Their survival is evidence of compassion and community, traits we often reserve in our minds for modern humans alone. The fossils can't tell us the names or personalities of these individuals, but they reveal a world where empathy was not an invention of sapiens, it was a shared inheritance across the human family. Burial sites, too, offer glimpses of emotional depth. When we find bodies positioned intentionally, curled in fetal poses, resting on their sides, sometimes accompanied by tools, flowers, or pigments, we sense ritual. We sense respect for the dead. Even if we do not know the beliefs that guided these acts, we can recognize the emotions behind them: grief, remembrance, love. A grave is not merely a deposit of bones, it is a message across time, whispering that ancient people mourned their losses just as we do. Artifacts also tell human stories. A tool shaped with extra care, beyond what was necessary for survival, suggests pride and craftsmanship. A decorated object, whether a carved bone or a piece of ochre-stained shell, hints at a desire for beauty, an aesthetic impulse that transcends time. These items are small windows into minds capable of imagination and symbolism. They remind us that ancient people were not simply reacting to their environment, they were shaping their world creatively. Consider footprints preserved in ancient mud. A trail of small prints beside larger ones suggests a child walking alongside an adult, perhaps holding hands, perhaps skipping ahead, perhaps learning to navigate their surroundings. A solitary footprint on a dune might represent someone wandering, searching, or exploring. A group of footprints moving in the same direction could signal migration, a family traveling together, or a community escaping danger. These impressions are ghostly echoes of moments that once felt as vivid to them as our daily routines feel to us. Even dietary evidence hints at lifestyles and emotions. Patterns of tooth wear show how individuals chewed their food, revealing whether they preferred tough roots, meat, or soft berries. Isotopes in bones reveal seasonal migrations, painting images of people traveling across landscapes, following herds, or seeking shelter during harsh winters. These scientific details translate into scenes of endurance, adaptation, and intimate knowledge of the land. Ancient people were not passive beings, they were skilled, observant, and deeply connected to their environments. Bones also record stress and struggle. Signs of malnutrition show years of scarcity. Fractures reveal accidents or dangers faced. Wear on joints indicates repetitive tasks, grinding grain, scraping hides, carrying heavy loads. These marks tell stories of resilience and daily effort. They reveal the physical realities of lives full of movement, labor, and perseverance. But they also suggest determination. Despite hardships, these individuals lived, adapted, and raised children who continued their lineage. One of the most profound insights comes from studying ancient hands. The shape of finger bones, the development of certain muscles, and the wear on joints reveal activities that once filled their days. A hand adapted for fine manipulation hints at toolmaking, crafting, or repairing. A hand shaped by climbing or digging tells us about the landscapes they navigated. Through these anatomical clues, we begin to see ancient people not just as biological organisms but as active participants in their world, creators, problem solvers, travelers, caretakers. Skulls, too, offer clues to identity. Subtle variations in facial structure hint at diversity and individuality. A wide nose, a pronounced brow ridge, a particular jaw shape, all of these reflect adaptations, but they also reflect personhood. These were faces that smiled, frowned, laughed, argued, and expressed emotions just as ours do. The skull is not a symbol of death, it is the architecture of a lived human experience. Modern science is increasingly aware of the danger of dehumanizing ancient people through overly clinical descriptions. Researchers now emphasize context, environmental, cultural, social, to ensure fossils are understood as part of living communities. Anthropologists collaborate with neuroscientists, psychologists, and indigenous scholars to interpret behavior through a broader lens. The goal is not to romanticize ancient people but to acknowledge their complexity. They were not primitive versions of us, they were fully realized human beings shaped by their own time. Recognizing the lives behind the bones also shifts our philosophical understanding. It reminds us that humanity is not defined solely by intelligence or technology, but by connection. By care. By creativity. By the shared rhythms of living and dying. These qualities existed long before Homo sapiens emerged. They were present in Neanderthals, Denisovans, and perhaps even earlier species. Our lineage is not special because we invented art or burial rituals, it is part of a long continuum of emotional and social richness. When we look at ancient bones, we are not looking at failed experiments or evolutionary stepping stones. We are looking at individuals who lived meaningful lives. They loved, feared, learned, suffered, and hoped. They raised children, endured winters, watched sunsets, and told stories we will never hear. Their bones are the final chapters of stories whose full length we can only imagine. Seeing ancient people as people does not just enrich our understanding of the past, it deepens our understanding of ourselves. It reminds us that humanity is older, broader, and more diverse than we once believed. And it invites us to feel connected not just to our direct ancestors but to the entire human family that walked this earth long before us. When we think of prehistory, we often imagine it through the lens of the fossils we already know, skulls displayed in museums, skeletons carefully arranged behind glass, and iconic discoveries that define our understanding of human evolution. But the truth is far more humbling. The fossils we have found are only a tiny fraction of what once existed. The overwhelming majority remain hidden in the earth, destroyed by time, or located in places we have never searched. Humanity's story is therefore incomplete, not because we lack curiosity, but because the earth has revealed only a sliver of its ancient memory. The most transformative discoveries may still lie buried, waiting to rewrite our understanding of the past. Every fossil we uncover changes our perspective. When Homo floresiensis was found, it redefined what a human ancestor could look like. When the Denisovans were discovered through a single bone fragment, they reshaped our understanding of migration and interbreeding. When Homo naledi appeared, with its puzzling blend of traits, scientists realized that ancient species could survive far longer than expected. These discoveries taught us that what we think is impossible can become undeniable with a single find. If such shocking revelations emerged from only a handful of fossils, imagine what remains hidden. Consider the geographical gaps in our knowledge. Large swaths of Africa, South America, and Asia remain unexplored due to political conflict, dense vegetation, inaccessibility, or lack of funding. Entire landscapes filled with ancient life may lie untouched. Rainforests, deserts, and mountainous regions may conceal fossils that could reshape evolutionary timelines. The earliest humans, or even previously unknown branches of the hominin family tree, could be waiting beneath layers of soil, rock, or volcanic ash. Until we excavate these regions, our evolutionary map will remain incomplete. Then there are the fossils that once existed but were erased by geological processes. Erosion, earthquakes, volcanic activity, and continental drift have destroyed countless remains. Many ancient species lived in environments where preservation was nearly impossible: humid forests, acidic soils, or floodplains that constantly shifted. Their bones dissolved long before they had a chance to fossilize. These lost species played roles in our history, influencing evolution in ways we may never know. Their absence is a reminder that the fossil record is not a complete archive but a scattered collection of survivors. Even within well-studied regions, treasures remain buried. Archaeologists often say that for every fossil we find, hundreds are still underground. Many may rest just beyond areas we've excavated or beneath structures we cannot disturb. Others may sit in museum storage, unexamined, mislabeled, or awaiting technologies capable of revealing their secrets. New scanning methods, for instance, have uncovered unnoticed details in fossils collected decades ago. It is entirely possible that a piece of our evolutionary puzzle already sits in a drawer somewhere, waiting for someone to understand its significance. The fossils we haven't found yet could answer some of the biggest questions in human evolution. What were the earliest ancestors of Homo sapiens really like? How many hominin species coexisted, and how often did they interact? Did entirely separate human lineages arise and go extinct without leaving descendants? What migrations shaped the world before Homo sapiens spread across the globe? Each unanswered question is a doorway waiting for the right fossil key. Some discoveries could even overturn long-held assumptions. For example, a fossil much older than expected found outside Africa could shift the timeline of human dispersal. A skeleton with a surprising mix of features could reveal evolutionary experiments we never imagined. A child's tooth in a remote cave could unlock knowledge about ancient behavior, diet, or population structure. The absence of fossils does not mean the absence of history, it often means we simply haven't looked in the right place yet. But the search for missing fossils is not just a scientific pursuit, it is a philosophical journey. It reminds us that knowledge is always provisional. What we believe today may be disproven tomorrow. This uncertainty is not a weakness, it is the foundation of scientific growth. Each discovery forces us to rethink our assumptions, refine our theories, and widen our perspective. The fossils we haven't found yet are symbols of possibility, reminding us that the past is larger than our interpretations of it. There is also a sense of quiet wonder in imagining what lies buried. Somewhere beneath ancient sediments, perhaps in the shadow of a mountain or along the bed of a forgotten river, rests a skull that could redefine what it means to be human. Somewhere in a remote cave, untouched for tens of thousands of years, lies a tool that hints at a culture we have never discovered. Somewhere in an unexplored region of Africa sleeps a species that fills a gap in our family tree, waiting for the day sunlight touches it again. In this sense, the fossils we haven't found yet are both scientific mysteries and poetic reminders of the vastness of time. They whisper from beneath the earth that our story is not finished, that there are chapters missing, and that curiosity is the force that will uncover them. Every dig, every expedition, every brush of dust from stone brings us closer to understanding the intricate tapestry of life. The future of paleontology holds extraordinary promise. Advances in technology, increased global collaboration, and explorations into previously inaccessible regions may soon reveal discoveries that transform our view of the past. But even then, the fossil record will remain incomplete. There will always be more to find, more to question, more to imagine. And perhaps that is the beauty of it. The fossils we haven't found yet keep the story of humanity alive, not as a fixed narrative but as a living, evolving mystery. They remind us that the past is not a closed book but an unfinished epic, still waiting to be read. For more than a century, fossils were the primary window into our ancient past. They shaped our timelines, defined our species, and guided our understanding of how humans evolved. But in recent decades, a new kind of evidence has risen alongside them: DNA, a microscopic archive written inside every living cell. Unlike fossils, which preserve rare physical fragments, DNA preserves relationships, migrations, interbreeding events, and ancient population dynamics. Yet the most fascinating part is this: fossils and DNA often tell different stories. Sometimes they complement each other beautifully, but at other times they clash, forcing scientists to reevaluate long-standing beliefs. The past, it turns out, leaves not one record but two, and reconciling them is one of the greatest scientific challenges of our time. Fossils provide physical context: who existed, where they lived, and what they looked like. DNA provides invisible context: who their relatives were, how populations connected, and what traits they carried. The tension arises because these two forms of evidence preserve different aspects of reality. Fossils show bodies, DNA shows relationships. Fossils reveal individuals, DNA reveals populations. And because both forms of evidence are incomplete, their stories rarely line up perfectly. One of the earliest shocks came with the discovery that modern humans carry Neanderthal DNA. For years, the fossil record suggested that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens were separate species with limited overlap. Fossils showed differences in anatomy, tools, and geographic distribution. Many scientists assumed they rarely encountered one another, and some believed they were too different to interbreed. Yet when the Neanderthal genome was sequenced in 2010, it revealed that all non-African humans carry traces of Neanderthal ancestry. This meant that interbreeding was not only possible, it was common enough to leave a significant genetic legacy. This revelation overturned the fossil-based narrative. Fossils had shown two species separated by time and space. DNA showed two species intertwined through shared ancestry. Suddenly, the story of human evolution looked less like competition and more like coexistence and blending. It was a reminder that fossils tell us who was there, but DNA tells us who remains. the Denisovans added another dramatic twist. Before their discovery, fossils from Asia hinted at multiple hominin species, but nothing pointed clearly to a distinct lineage. Yet DNA extracted from a finger bone found in Denisova cave revealed an entirely new human species, not from its physical traits, but from its genetic uniqueness. The fossil itself was too fragmentary to identify anything special. It was the DNA that exposed an entire population with widespread influence across Asia and Oceania. In this case, the fossil record was silent, but DNA shouted. Even more astonishing was the discovery of hybrid ancestry within ancient individuals. A bone fragment found in Denisova cave belonged to a girl whose mother was a Neanderthal and father was a Denisovan. Fossils alone could never have revealed such a direct connection. DNA showed not only that interbreeding occurred, but that it happened repeatedly, intimately, and across thousands of years. The fossil record offered no such detail. Without DNA, we would have imagined these species as distant relatives. With DNA, we see them as overlapping, interacting branches of the human family. But DNA also contradicts fossils in subtler ways. For example, genetic analysis shows that human populations in Africa diverged far earlier than fossil evidence alone suggested. Fossils imply certain timelines, but DNA suggests deeper, more complex roots. Some genetic splits appear to predate the oldest known Homo sapiens fossils, implying that earlier, undiscovered populations played crucial roles in our origins. This pushes the timeline of humanity backward, hinting at missing fossils yet to be found, or perhaps lost forever. DNA has also revealed ghost populations, groups of ancient humans with no fossil evidence whatsoever. Their existence is inferred only through genetic traces found in modern populations. These ghost ancestors complicate the narrative built solely on fossils, indicating that entire branches of humanity remain physically invisible. They shaped our genes, influenced our adaptations, and contributed to our diversity, yet no bone or tool has been definitively linked to them. Their absence from the fossil record reminds us how incomplete our physical evidence truly is. This duality extends to migration patterns as well. Fossils once suggested a neat, out-of-Africa model, where humans expanded in a single wave. But DNA reveals multiple waves, some successful, some failing, some mixing with other species, some leaving faint genetic whispers across continents. Fossils show movement through space, DNA shows movement through bloodlines. The two maps overlap imperfectly, and reconciling them requires constant revision. Even within species, fossils and DNA may disagree on relationships. Fossils express variation through shape, size, and structure. DNA expresses variation through mutations, alleles, and shared sequences. A fossil might look primitive based on jaw shape, but its DNA might suggest it was part of a later, more advanced group. Conversely, a fossil that looks modern might possess ancient genetic traits. This happens because evolution is not uniform, traits evolve at different rates, environments select for different features, and adaptation does not follow a strict schedule. Consider brain size. Fossils once led scientists to believe that increasing brain size was a defining, linear path toward modern humans. But DNA shows that many genes related to brain development evolved independently across different lineages. Some ancient humans had large brains but did not develop the symbolic culture associated with Homo sapiens. Others with smaller brains, like Homo floresiensis or Homo naledi, show signs of complex behavior. DNA demonstrates that intelligence is not simply a function of brain volume, it is a product of genetic networks, environment, and cultural evolution. The tension between DNA and fossils forces science to evolve. It pushes researchers to ask better questions and build more nuanced models. It also reminds us that truth is not found in a single type of evidence but in the conversation between multiple lines of inquiry. Fossils reveal form, DNA reveals function. Fossils show presence, DNA shows lineage. Together, they paint a richer, more complex portrait of humanity, one filled with branching paths, forgotten species, interwoven identities, and unexpected connections. This dual storytelling also invites philosophical reflection. It challenges our desire for simple narratives and clear categories. It reminds us that evolution is not orderly but improvisational. It forces us to accept uncertainty as part of knowledge, not its enemy. The disagreement between fossils and DNA is not a problem to be solved but a dialogue to be understood. In the end, the two records, stone and genetic code, are not competing storytellers but complementary ones. Fossils show us the bodies that walked the earth. DNA shows us the bloodlines that continue within us. And where their stories diverge, that tension reveals the gaps in our knowledge, the mysteries still hidden, and the discoveries yet to come. The truth of human evolution lies not in choosing one story over the other, but in learning to listen to both. Humans have always craved certainty. We long for answers that feel solid, complete, and final. When we look into the deep past, into the distant reaches of human evolution, we carry this desire with us, hoping for a narrative that makes sense, a chain of events we can follow step by step. But the prehistoric world resists this longing. It is fragmented, chaotic, and full of contradictions. Fossils provide incomplete data, DNA generates puzzles as often as solutions, interpretations shift from decade to decade. And yet, despite knowing how uncertain the evidence is, we cling to clean stories because they comfort us. Certainty gives us the illusion of control, even when the truth is far more complicated. From childhood, we learn history as a procession of clear events, one thing leads to another. This linear thinking seeps into how we imagine evolution. We want to believe that Homo sapiens emerged in a tidy sequence of improvements, each species giving way neatly to the next. This narrative satisfies our sense of progression. It frames humanity as the endpoint of a purposeful process. But evolution does not obey our desire for order. It branches, loops, stalls, reverses, and overlaps. Species coexist, interbreed, compete, and disappear in ways that often leave no fossil trace. The real story is tangled, not linear. Yet our minds instinctively simplify it into a straight path because complexity feels unsettling. Part of this instinct comes from cognitive bias. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We look for cause and effect, order and structure, even when evidence is sparse or ambiguous. When we see a skeleton that looks slightly more primitive, we place it earlier in the timeline. When we find a tool that seems more refined, we assume it belongs to a more advanced species. These assumptions are not always grounded in evidence, they emerge from our internal need for coherence. The fossil record, however, does not always cooperate. Different species with different traits often lived at the same time. Primitive does not always mean old, and advanced does not always mean recent. But our brains grasp for certainty, smoothing out these contradictions. Another reason we cling to clean stories is emotional. A tidy evolutionary narrative reassures us that humanity has a clear beginning and an inevitable endpoint. It provides a sense of identity and belonging. If we imagine our species as the pinnacle of millions of years of progress, then our existence feels meaningful, even fated. But if we accept the messy reality, that we are one successful branch among many, shaped by chance as much as adaptation, the sense of certainty dissolves. Our place in nature becomes humbler, less predetermined. For many, this feels uncomfortable. Science itself is not immune to these pressures. Researchers strive to be objective, but they, too, prefer elegant explanations. A theory that ties together multiple discoveries with a simple narrative is naturally appealing. It feels satisfying, credible, and persuasive. But simple stories can obscure contradictory evidence. When a new fossil or DNA study disrupts the neat pattern, scientists must confront the uncomfortable truth that certainty was premature. The history of paleontology is full of theories once believed to be correct: linear evolution, the missing link, European origin narratives, that were later demolished by new evidence. These reversals remind us that certainty in science is provisional, not permanent. Certainty also provides social and cultural stability. Human origins are deeply tied to identity, politics, religion, and worldview. A change in the narrative can feel threatening. When early African fossils first challenged Eurocentric ideas of human origins, many resisted, not because the evidence was weak, but because the new story disrupted cultural expectations. Certainty often aligns with familiarity. When new discoveries challenge the familiar, even strong evidence can face resistance. There is also the issue of storytelling itself. Humans understand the world through narratives, stories with beginnings, middles, and ends. When we talk about ancient humans, we naturally frame their history in narrative form. But evolution is not a story with a clear plot. It is a vast collection of events without direction or intentionality. Still, we impose narrative structure because it allows us to make sense of randomness. The danger is that we sometimes forget the story is a simplification, not the reality. Yet the most profound reason we cling to certainty may be existential. The past is distant, unreachable, and silent. We cannot observe it directly, we can only infer it. This creates a psychological void that we instinctively fill. A clear explanation calms the discomfort of not knowing. It offers mental closure. Ambiguity, on the other hand, requires us to accept our limitations. It forces us to acknowledge how much we may never know. This humility is hard to embrace. But the beauty of science lies not in certainty, but in its ability to evolve. When new evidence emerges, it reshapes our understanding. Certainty becomes uncertainty, and uncertainty leads to deeper inquiry. Each overturned theory is not a failure, it is progress. It is a reminder that knowledge is dynamic, expansive, and endlessly unfolding. Recognizing the problem with certainty helps us appreciate the true nature of the human story. It is not a perfect narrative. It is a mosaic of evidence, ideas, and corrections. It is a dialogue between fossils and genetics, between earlier interpretations and new discoveries. The messiness does not make the story weaker, it makes it richer. The prehistoric world teaches us that certainty is an illusion. Fossils erode. DNA degrades. Sediments shift. What survives is incomplete, and what is lost is immeasurable. But acknowledging uncertainty does not diminish our understanding, it deepens it. It encourages us to question assumptions, revise theories, and remain open to mystery. In the end, the problem with certainty is not that we seek it, but that we cling to it too tightly. When we release that grip, we gain a clearer, more honest view of our origins. We see evolution not as a straight line, but as a vast, branching landscape filled with possibilities. We see humanity not as the inevitable peak of nature, but as one remarkable outcome among many. The past is not a clean story, but it is a fascinating one. And once we embrace its complexity, the real wonder begins. When we speak of fossils, we usually imagine ancient bones entombed in rock, evidence of species long gone. But scattered across our world today are creatures so similar to their prehistoric ancestors that they are often called living fossils. Horseshoe crabs, coelacanth, lungfish, crocodiles, these beings have remained astonishingly unchanged for tens or even hundreds of millions of years. Their existence forces us to reconsider our assumptions about evolution, adaptation, and what it means for a species to progress. They are reminders that survival does not always require transformation, and that the ancient world is not entirely lost, it lives quietly alongside us. At first glance, living fossils can seem like exceptions, strange anomalies that somehow slipped through evolutionary time without altering their fundamental forms. But their persistence isn't due to evolutionary stagnation. It's due to evolutionary success. These species found strategies that worked so well that drastic changes never became necessary. Their bodies, behaviors, and ecological roles were already efficient enough to withstand mass extinctions, climate upheavals, and shifting ecosystems. They are not relics frozen in time, but survivors shaped by environments where stability was more advantageous than innovation. Take the horseshoe crab. It has remained nearly identical in form for over 450 million years, longer than trees have existed. Its simple, armored body and unique blood chemistry are perfectly suited to its coastal habitat. While countless other species rose and fell, the horseshoe crab endured because it fit its niche better than any competitor. Its ancient design is not a flaw, it is a masterpiece of resilience. The coelacanth tells a similar story. Believed extinct for 65 million years until a specimen was found alive in 1938, this deep-sea fish is a direct link to the Devonian era. Its lobed fins provide insight into the early evolution of limbs, yet the coelacanth itself did not transform into a land animal. Instead, it retreated into deep ocean environments where predators were few and conditions remained stable. Its continued existence shows that evolution follows different paths depending on pressure and opportunity. Some species diversify wildly, others persist by embracing ecological quiet. These creatures challenge our idea of primitive. We often assume that ancient-looking species are inferior or less evolved. But evolution has no direction, no goal of becoming more complex or more modern. A creature that appears unchanged is not unevolved, it is perfectly evolved for its environment. Complexity is not inherently better than simplicity. Many organisms thrive because they remain exactly what they have always been. Living fossils also offer glimpses into ecosystems long vanished. When we watch a crocodile hunt or a nautilus drift through the water, we witness behaviors that have been repeated for millions of years. These species serve as living time machines, allowing us to imagine how ancient predators and prey interacted. Their sensory systems, feeding habits, and life cycles reflect evolutionary strategies honed across epochs. They remind us that the prehistoric world was not filled solely with strange and unfamiliar beings, it was populated by ancestors of the animals we see today, carrying forward traits that have stood the test of time. Human ancestors, by contrast, changed rapidly. Over millions of years, hominins adapted to fluctuating climates, shifting diets, and new challenges. Our lineage features dramatic transformations, larger brains, upright posture, tool use, symbolic thought. This rapid evolution was driven by instability. As environments fluctuated, early humans needed adaptability, creativity, and flexibility to survive. While living fossils thrived in stability, human ancestors thrived in change. This contrast teaches us that evolution favors different strategies depending on context. But living fossils also complicate our understanding of extinction. Their survival through multiple mass extinctions raises profound questions. Why did they persist when so many others vanished? Often, the answer lies in their ecological conservatism. Many live in stable, low-competition environments, deep oceans, muddy estuaries, or remote river systems. They are not generalists but specialists tuned perfectly to niches that have changed very little over time. In a way, they survived not because they were stronger or smarter, but because they occupied corners of the natural world untouched by dramatic upheaval. This has philosophical implications. Living fossils remind us that evolution is not a race toward progress. It is a constant negotiation between organisms and the environments they inhabit. Some lineages transform through innovation, others endure through consistency. Both strategies are valid. Both represent the power of nature's creativity. For paleontologists, living fossils provide invaluable insight. They offer clues about the soft tissues, behaviors, and ecological roles of extinct relatives. Studying them can reveal how ancient species might have moved, sensed the world, or reproduced. They act as bridges between fossil evidence and living biology, guiding interpretation where stone alone cannot provide answers. Yet living fossils also warn us against oversimplification. Just because a species looks ancient does not mean everything about it is unchanged. Many have undergone significant genetic, physiological, or behavioral evolution that is not reflected in their outward form. The coelacanth, for example, has adapted to the deep sea in ways its fossil ancestors never did. Horseshoe crabs have changed their reproductive timing and migratory behaviors in response to modern tides and climates. What appears unchanged is often the result of subtler evolutionary refinements. Ultimately, living fossils invite reflection on time itself. They remind us that the past is not entirely gone, it swims in our oceans, crawls along our shores, and hides in our forests. They show us that ancient forms can coexist with modern ones, that evolution is not a ladder but a branching continuum. And they reveal something humbling: the creatures we consider ancient are not remnants of a bygone world but successful inhabitants of the present. To see a living fossil is to glimpse continuity across unimaginable stretches of time. It is to realize that life on Earth is not a sequence of replacements but a tapestry where old and new coexist. Just as we carry traces of ancient humans in our DNA, the living fossils around us carry echoes of worlds that came long before. They are reminders that the story of life is not written only in stone, it is written in every living being that has endured through the ages, adapting not always through transformation but sometimes through the quiet, powerful art of staying the same. Reconstructing human history is like piecing together a vast mosaic from fragments scattered across millions of years. Each fossil, each artifact, each genetic clue offers a shard of truth, but never the full picture. Scientists must take these fragments and attempt to build coherent narratives, knowing all the while that their reconstructions are temporary, provisional, and vulnerable to overturning. This is not a weakness of science, it is its strength. The ability to revise, question, and rebuild our understanding is what sets scientific inquiry apart from myth. And nowhere is this humility more necessary than in the study of our ancient past. The fossil record is filled with gaps, distortions, and accidents of preservation. Some species left abundant remains, others left none at all. Geological forces scatter evidence, erase context, and create illusions. DNA preserves relationships but not behaviors. Tools show human intention, but not the thoughts behind them. When scientists attempt to reconstruct prehistoric worlds, they must acknowledge that they are working from incomplete information, like archaeologists studying the ruins of a library after most of its books have burned. In such a situation, humility is not optional, it is essential. This humility becomes clear when we look at how often scientific interpretations have changed. There was a time when Neanderthals were seen as brutish. A time when Homo sapiens were believed to be the only hominin species with symbolic thought. A time when the human family tree was imagined as a straight ladder. A time when interbreeding between species was dismissed as impossible. Each of these assumptions felt solid, backed by evidence and expert consensus. Yet each was overturned by new discoveries, sometimes a single fossil, sometimes a single genome, sometimes a reinterpretation of a site previously taken for granted. Scientific humility is also tested by the biases that shape interpretation. Researchers, like all humans, bring cultural assumptions into their work. Ideas about gender roles, intelligence, progress, race, and social structure seep into scientific models. When these assumptions are challenged, it forces scientists to confront not only their interpretations but also their internal frameworks. This process can be uncomfortable, but it is necessary if we want our understanding of the past to be more accurate and less reflective of our modern prejudices. One example is the shifting view of early human behavior. For decades, scientists focused on hunting as the primary driver of human evolution, reflecting cultural values about masculinity, toughness, and dominance. But newer evidence shows that gathering, cooperation, child-rearing, and social communication were equally important. This broader perspective emerged because researchers questioned old assumptions and embraced new evidence. It required humility to let go of narratives that had shaped the field for generations. Humility also shows up in the way scientists deal with uncertainty. In many sciences, uncertainty is seen as a limitation. But in paleontology and anthropology, uncertainty is a landscape to be navigated. Scientists must balance bold hypotheses with caution, creativity with skepticism. They must be willing to entertain multiple possibilities at once, and to revise their theories when new data arrives. This is why scientific papers often use careful language: suggests, implies, may indicate. These phrases are not signs of weakness, they are signs of intellectual honesty. The art of reconstruction requires imagination, but it must be imagination guided by evidence. Scientists build models, create digital reconstructions, and simulate ancient environments to test hypotheses. They compare fossils across species, analyze wear patterns on teeth, study microscopic scratches on bones, and sequence ancient DNA. All of this work reveals glimpses of ancient lives, but never the full reality. Humility lies in recognizing the limits of these methods. Even the most vivid reconstructions, museum dioramas, animated documentaries, detailed illustrations, must be understood as interpretations, not truths. The posture of a dinosaur, the facial expression of a Neanderthal, the color of ancient skin or hair, the sound of a prehistoric landscape, these elements are crafted from best guesses, not direct evidence. They bring the past to life, but they also run the risk of falsely solidifying stories that may later change. Scientists must constantly remind the public, and themselves, that these images are provisional. Technological advances require humility as well. Each new tool, from CT scanning to carbon dating to genome sequencing, revolutionizes our understanding. But each tool has limitations. DNA decays. Dating methods have ranges of uncertainty. Imaging techniques can misinterpret damage as anatomical structure. The more powerful the technology, the greater the temptation to trust it blindly. Scientists must remain cautious, remembering that tools can only illuminate what we already have, not conjure evidence that no longer exists. Perhaps the deepest form of scientific humility comes from accepting that some questions may never be answered. We may never know the full diversity of hominin species. We may never find the fossils that bridge certain evolutionary gaps. We may never fully understand the rituals, languages, or emotional experiences of ancient humans. The past is not a puzzle waiting to be solved, it is a vast, partially erased mural. We see only fragments of it, and even with perfect evidence, we would still interpret through human eyes. But this uncertainty is not a defeat. It is an invitation. It urges scientists to remain curious, to keep searching, to question assumptions, and to embrace new ideas. It reminds us that knowledge is not static but ever-evolving. Scientific humility allows us to marvel at the vastness of what we do not yet know, and to appreciate the breakthroughs that bring tiny pieces of that vastness into focus. In the end, reconstructing a shattered past is an act of both precision and imagination. It requires scientists to balance confidence in evidence with openness to revision. It asks them to build stories from fragments while resisting the temptation to force those fragments into neat narratives. And it teaches a profound lesson, that the pursuit of truth is not about achieving perfect certainty, but about continually refining our understanding in light of new discoveries. The story of humanity is not fixed. It grows richer, deeper, and more complex with every fossil unearthed and every genome decoded. Scientific humility ensures that we remain worthy of discovering it. When we examine fossils, ancient tools, or remnants of long-lost civilizations, we often speak of what they reveal. But just as important, perhaps even more important, are the stories they cannot tell. Fossils preserve the shapes of bones, but not the color of a sunset an ancient human once admired. They record the spacing of footprints, but not the laughter of the child who made them. They show us where a life ended, but rarely how it was lived. In this silence lies one of the most profound truths about human history: the physical evidence we uncover is only the faintest outline of worlds that were once rich with emotion, memory, culture, and meaning. Bones do not record songs. Stones do not remember conversations. Sediments do not preserve the dreams shared around campfires thousands of nights in a row. The prehistoric world was not empty or monotone, it was alive with stories that no rock or fossil can capture. And yet these invisible stories shaped our species as surely as any biological trait. The challenge, and the beauty, of studying the distant past is learning to sense the presence of narratives that have vanished completely. Consider the earliest humans who gazed at the stars. We can find their campsites, their tools, their bones, but we cannot know what myths they created about the constellations above them. What did they believe those lights represented? Did they imagine ancestors living above the sky? Did they tell stories of beasts, spirits, or cosmic journeys? Every culture today has myths about the stars, it is difficult to imagine ancient humans did not. Yet no fossil can confirm a single tale. These stories lived only in minds, passed through generations by voice, motion, ritual. When those generations ended, the stories dissolved into time. Language itself is one of the greatest missing chapters. We can see evidence of symbolic thought, patterns carved into rock, pigments collected for unknown purposes, but we cannot hear the voices that spoke. The first languages left no written records, no dictionaries, no grammar notes. They existed entirely in breath and sound. They shaped thought, emotion, and society, yet today we cannot recover a single word from them. Imagine the first lullaby a mother sang to her baby in a prehistoric cave. Imagine the first argument, the first joke, the first poem, echoes of humanity that fossils cannot hold. Tools, too, whisper incomplete stories. A beautifully knapped stone blade reveals skill and patience, but not the identity of its maker. Was the tool crafted in silence or during conversation? Was it made out of necessity or pride? Did the maker teach someone else the technique, passing knowledge forward? We know ancient humans taught each other, the sophistication of their tools proves it, but we cannot reconstruct the dynamics of that teaching. Was it formal? Casual? Reverent? Playful? These moments of shared learning shaped culture and identity, but they left no trace in the archaeological record. The emotional world of ancient humans is also lost to us. Fossils reveal injuries, but not the tears that followed. They show healed bones, but not the feelings of gratitude or love that inspired a community to care for someone who could not walk. A burial site shows respect, but not the grief that filled the air that day. We have evidence of flowers in graves, pigments on bodies, and objects placed beside the dead, but we will never know what words were spoken, what memories were honored, or what fears were soothed. Even the meaning of art, one of the oldest expressions of humanity, lies beyond our reach. Cave paintings depict animals, shapes, handprints, and symbols. But were these part of rituals? Teaching tools? Spiritual journeys? Expressions of pride or identity? A handprint on a cave wall is as personal as a signature, yet we cannot know the stories of the men, women, or children who pressed their hands against the stone. Their intentions, playful, sacred, rebellious, remain hidden. Migration stories are also buried beyond recovery. Fossils show where ancient people traveled, but not why. Did drought push them to move? Did curiosity? Conflict? Hope? Fear? Did they leave behind loved ones who stayed in familiar lands? Did they look back one last time before crossing into the unknown? These emotional decisions, the inner motivations that guided humanity across continents, are invisible in the material record. And yet these invisible forces shaped the entire course of human history. There are also cultural practices that fossils cannot reveal. Music, for example, leaves almost no trace unless instruments survive, and most early instruments were made of wood, fiber, or animal skin, materials lost long ago. Did ancient humans drum rhythms around fires? Almost certainly. Did they chant, hum, whistle, or sing? Undoubtedly. Music is so deeply embedded in human nature that it must have accompanied early rituals, celebrations, and gatherings. But the fossils do not hum the melodies back to us. Likewise, dance, the oldest storytelling technique in the world, left no footprints we can interpret with certainty. Did early humans dance to summon courage before a hunt? To celebrate a birth? To prepare for war? To honor ancestors? These performances, filled with emotion and meaning, would have been central to their culture, yet none survive except through imaginative inference. Childhood, too, is largely invisible. We find tiny bones, sometimes toys or miniature tools, but we cannot see the games children played or the laughter shared among them. We cannot know which stories frightened them, which elders they admired, or how they learned to walk through forests or track animals. Childhood is a core part of humanity, shaping adults and cultures alike, yet fossils can only hint at its richness. Even love, one of the most powerful human experiences, leaves no physical trace. Did early humans choose partners based on affection? Did they stay together for life? Did they struggle with heartbreak? Did they build families through shared care rather than survival alone? Bones cannot tell us. But the presence of long-term pair bonding in modern humans suggests that ancient emotions were just as deep, complicated, and transformative as those we experience today. Conflict also leaves stories untold. While some bones show signs of violence, most conflicts leave no mark. We can only guess at disputes over resources, territory, leadership, or personal grievances. The politics of ancient tribes, alliances, betrayals, negotiations, power struggles, remain invisible. Yet these events must have shaped migrations, innovations, and cultural evolutions in profound ways. What fossils do show us is only the scaffolding of human life. The architecture without the furnishings. The stage without the actors. The skeleton without the spirit. But this silence is not empty. It invites us to imagine the immeasurable richness of ancient existence. It encourages us to understand that prehistoric people were not defined by the tools they left behind, but by the thoughts, emotions, relationships, and stories that vanished with them. Their lives were as full and complex as ours, filled with joys and sorrows that the earth did not preserve. The stories stones cannot tell remind us of our own fragility. Someday, much of our world will also disappear without record. Future humans, or whoever inherits the earth, may find ruins of our cities but not the songs we loved, the jokes we told, or the dreams that shaped our lives. Our stories, too, may dissolve, just as theirs did. And yet, there is something profoundly beautiful in this realization. It connects us across time. We may not know the details of their lives, but we know what it feels like to be human. We know fear, hope, curiosity, joy, grief, and love. These emotions bridge the gulf between us and the ancient people whose stories have been lost. The stones cannot tell those stories, but our imagination can honor them.